Atlanta teenager Falicia Blakely is counting on her new boyfriend to make all her dreams come true.
He was giving her this sort of fantasy. We're going to go off somewhere to some other city and get a whole new start.
But Falicia learns the price she has to pay for his love is murder.
She was caught up in a mess that she'll never be able to reverse.
And in sunny San Bernardino, California, 19-year-old Kiesha Smith goes all out to impress her hustler boyfriend.
In his mind, they were like Bonnie and Clyde, and she was down for the ride.
And to keep him around, Kiesha dedicates her entire world to pleasing him.
It was a big decision for her to make if she was going to carry out these illegal activities.
She was willing to sacrifice herself and her life to protect her man, and she did.
By the time she's 16 years old, Jacksonville teen Falicia Blakely's had her fair share of troubles.
Felicia's father wasn't around. I had left him due to the fact that he started stealing and doing drugs, and I didn't want her or myself to be a part of that. So I left there, lived with my mom for a little while.
With her mother busy working to support the family, her grandmother takes over most of the parenting duties. The result is a rocky mother-daughter relationship until her mom makes a career move out of state.
Her mother moved to Atlanta for a job, and Falicia followed her here to Atlanta trying to build a relationship with her mother.
But the change of scenery doesn't seem to help. And after a month of living in the Peach State, Falicia and her mom are back at each other's throats.
She basically quit going to school, dropped out. That's when she really started changing, started being in the streets.
I didn't raise you like that!
And me and her were arguing pretty much every day.
Felicia's focus turns to making money.
She had a cousin who worked as an exotic dancer, a stripper up here in Atlanta, who persuaded Falicia that that might be a good life plan, that she should start dancing.
Despite being a minor, Falicia wastes no time finding work at a local strip club.
In Atlanta, you're required to have a permit establishing that you're an adult. She was dancing in some of those clubs without a permit, but fairly quickly secured a permit with fake identification papers.
What starts as a money-making venture soon evolves into something more.
Falicia was young and impressionable, so by stripping, in her mind, she was getting all sorts of attention from men, and it lifted her self-esteem, and it gave her validation.
But when Felicia's mother finds out, she's less than thrilled with her daughter's new path in life.
They had flyers that they were putting out. Felicia's pictures were on the flyer, and I found them. And it's just upsetting to find out that way.
When Betty confronts her, she insists that she has no intention of quitting.
Falicia said that in the state of Georgia, when you're 16, you're grown, and that gave her the right to strip because she considered an adult. So she ran away.
Falicia puts herself up at an extended stay hotel where many of the other girls from the club live.
Many young women who go into adult entertainment find that there is no exit. They become addicted to the money, to the attention, and it becomes a life where they get locked in because eventually they become abused in that industry.
I called legal aid trying to see what I could do. They said I could go downtown and file an unruly child thing where if anything happened, I wouldn't be in trouble, but I didn't want to do that. You know, I thought I could get her back.
Now out of the house and making her own money, Falicia falls hard for a DJ at another club.
In her mind, I think it was a real relationship, someone she cared about, and she thought he cared about her. But this DJ was stashing her in this motel for basically sex at his convenience. Falicia was 16 and young and unsophisticated. He was taking advantage of her.
A month after they start dating, Falicia finds out she's pregnant. But when she tells her new love, she doesn't get the reaction she's hoping for.
He did not want anything to do with Falicia or the baby, and he didn't stick around.
This is pretty devastating for Falicia. She's emotionally wounded, plus she's got a pregnancy to deal with on her own.
After 3 months away from home, Falicia moves back in with her mother. And finally, she gets the reaction she's been hoping for.
I was happy when I found out I was going to be a grandmother. I hoped that she would stop dancing, stripping. I thought it might bring her back to normalcy. I really did.
But Falicia has no plans of giving up her new life.
Falicia knew she had to provide for her and her child, so she continued to strip even while pregnant.
Desperate to make as much money as she can before the baby comes. the 6-month pregnant teen takes an opportunity to talk to a long-standing customer named Marcus, who she's seen around the club.
There was a fight at the club, and this regular was involved. So Falicia got him a bandage. He took full advantage of that introduction. He paid her to dance that night. He even paid her not to dance, and they just sat and talked.
Marcus seems to have a caring way about him, and Falicia feels an instant connection. Before she knows it, the mom-to-be pours her soul out to him.
Falicia told this individual that she was pregnant and that she wasn't going to be able to dance a lot longer. She was in need. She was in financial difficulties.
And Marcus seems to know just how to put Felicia's mind at ease.
He told her that they would get through this together, that he would take care of her, he would take care of the baby, and that's exactly what she wanted to and needed to hear.
They ended up exchanging phone numbers, and that was the beginning of their relationship.
But Marcus is not just a regular at the strip club. He uses it as a part-time office and recruitment center for hiring girls to work for him.
She knew he was a pimp when she met him. It was common knowledge in the club. He was pimping out some of the girls dancing in the club, so I don't think that was a big surprise to her.
Falicia was 16 years old when she went on to the pole. Even though she was part of the industry, she knew the pimps, they hung out where she worked. She didn't really understand who these individuals were and how dangerous that they could be.
Before Falicia gets a chance to see Marcus again, he gets arrested for battery and marijuana possession. But being locked up doesn't stop him from pursuing Falicia.
He called her every day. He was giving her money, sending her people to take her to work. He was essentially courting her from jail.
Basically, she took that to mean that he's going to look out for me no matter what. It just seemed to confirm her hopes for that relationship.
This made a huge impression on Falicia and made her feel wanted, but even worse, got her to be even more dependent on him than she ever was before.
3 months after Marcus is locked up, he's released from jail, and Falicia gives birth to her son. Then, a few weeks after, she settles into motherhood. As promised, he steps in to care for the new pair, treating both Falicia and her child like they're his own family.
That's when he introduced himself, and I hated him from that day forth.
He was taking care of her, paying the bills, even buying Pampers for the baby.
Less than a month after giving birth, Marcus encourages Falicia to go back to work and to once again move out of her mom's house.
He puts her in a motel. He has a babysitter in there, another woman, who is taking care of Felicia's baby when she's out making money.
They were living in a motel because that's where he kept all his girls. And even though Falicia felt like she was different, she wasn't.
Unlike the other women who work for him, Marcus continues to court Falicia and engage her in a relationship.
Falicia was slowly but surely being exposed to Marcus's pimp business. In many ways, he was beginning to desensitize her, and he did it in a very conscious way. This is what we call the grooming.
I would have tried to stop it, but I was under the impression that she was just going to be home, raising her baby. I was happy.
5 months after Falicia moves into the motel, Marcus expects a return on his favors. He suggests she start tricking for him.
He was telling her that they needed the money to move out of Atlanta, buy a bigger house, raise a family together.
It's everything the now 17-year-old has always wanted. So she agrees to sell her body for money.
All of this for this pimp who was going to give her a wonderful life that she didn't have before. Falicia believed that she loved him and believed that this was a loving relationship.
He sold her a dream, so she did everything she could to please him. She was willing to do anything for her man. Offered sexual favors for money. He agreed. She took him to a back room.
But things don't go as planned.
As they start getting into it, he informs her he doesn't have a condom. So he says he's going to go get one and come back. But he never came back.
When Marcus picks Falicia up from work that night, she tells him what happened. And Falicia gets her first taste of her boyfriend's violent side.
He gets out of the car, comes around to her side, and to her complete shock, beats her badly.
She had witnessed some of the violence between her boyfriend and the other girls, but she thought she was different. She thought she was one of his special girls.
When you look at the relationship between a pimp and a prostitute, for the pimp, it's all about the money. He'll set some sort of a quota that she is supposed to meet, and if she doesn't meet it, then she will be severely punished.
She was one in a stable of women who were making money for him.
From that day forward, Falicia doesn't miss another opportunity to make money for Marcus again.
So fairly quickly, Falicia then ends up becoming a full-time prostitute. And she started getting accustomed to it. She got a little better at it. She actually got some regular customers. All of the proceeds are going to the pimp.
But the life is no place for a child, and Falicia leaves her son with her mother with little explanation.
She always wants to protect me. She doesn't want me to know everything, so I don't know what actually happened.
Over the next year, she becomes Marcus's top girl and is charged with training a new girl, 21-year-old Amisha Irvin. The girls are handed guns along with a gruesome new assignment. He wants them to start robbing their tricks to bring in more money. To avoid disappointing him or bringing harm to herself, she agrees to rob one of Marcus's top clients, Frederick Calloway, a known drug dealer in Orlando, Florida.
That really is an example of how loyal she was to him, that she was willing to carry a weapon and use it on someone else to take what they have to give to him.
Strapped with her new gun, Falicia and prostitute partner Amisha head down to Florida to complete their mission.
They went back to his motel room, and after sex, they robbed him. And Falicia shot him.
After Falicia shot him, they were so scared they just ran out of there. They didn't even give me money.
Frederick survives the shot, but it paralyzes him from the waist down. He doesn't have enough information about Marcus's girls to name Falicia and Amisha, and neither one are ever pursued by police. Back in Atlanta, Marcus is furious they have returned empty-handed, and he makes Falicia pay the price for their failure.
And you forget the money. He poured alcohol on her and lit her on fire.
It's not easy, as one may think, for Falicia to just get up one day and say that I'm out of here. I'm going to get out of this abusive situation. At this point, her self-esteem has been destroyed. Her spirit has been crushed. She's afraid, and she's under constant threat.
Fortunately, Falicia only suffers minor burns. She relies on the girls to help her make a speedy recovery.
Whenever he severely beat a girl or injured her, he wouldn't take her to the hospital. He made the other girls nurse her back to health.
They would stay in the motel room together and bandage up their wounds and wait till they healed up and go back out and start turning tricks again.
Once she's recovered, Marcus sends Falicia and Amisha out to make it right. He tells them to rob one of their regulars, Ray Goodwin. Felicia's upset because she genuinely likes Ray.
He was a listening ear when she had issues, but he always tried to encourage her to do something else with her life.
And to make sure Falicia doesn't get cold feet, Marcus calls her on the way over for some final encouragement.
Do what you gotta do. But get my money.
The pimp tells her, get that money. Don't come home without that money. You need to hit this lick. The phrase was always hit a lick. And I think what Falicia was told by the pimp, she understood to mean kill.
Get my drugs. Don't leave no witnesses.
Falicia had to make a decision. She either had to rob her friend to please her man or face his wrath. So she grew more and more desperate to get it right and to please him.
She may have seen it as a last chance for her to prove her love to the pimp.
When Falicia and Amisha arrive at his place, unsuspecting Ray has no idea that his life is in the nervous palms of Felicia's hands.
They start playing music and they start drinking and just basically passing the time while Falicia is trying to work up the nerve to do what she believes the pimp has told her to do.
Felicia's just about to make her move when Ray's friend, Claudel Christmas, known as Doc, knocks on the door. It's just the interruption she's been praying for.
So she got on the phone and called her pimp. Well, she was expecting for him to say that you don't have to do it. He, in fact, said no witnesses.
She pretty much had to do whatever he said. It was either them or her. That's all. And she didn't want to die.
She didn't hang up the phone. She went back in the room and kept him on speaker
Falicia pulls out her gun and levels it at Doc.
What are you doing? Stop!
And later, in San Bernardino, California, Kiesha Smith, one-time girl next door, channels her dark side to keep her man interested.
Kiesha grabbed the pillowcase and put it over her head.
Ultimately, her love for him would be her demise. Everything that she did it for her man.
All my love scattered everywhere.
When he looked at me, I just melted.
Dreams so sweet turned into a nightmare.
I didn't suspect that he was a straight-out killer demon. I knew I was in trouble.
I've been going crazy.
That's a hell of a price to pay. Just for one damn...
And that's when Falicia takes out her gun and shoots him multiple times and kills him.
Once again, the girls only find a few $100s in the apartment, but their big payoff is the man's car. They take it back to show Marcus. Tonight, he seems pleased.
He wanted her to commit these murders partly for the money, but partly sort of as a control mechanism. If she's killed somebody, he's got her for life. She can never get away from him. He's got something on her.
Keep it in your bag.
The following day, Marcus gets greedy and sends his girls out into the city on a week-long robbery spree.
They were successful a couple of times. They had robbed a few restaurants and gotten some money for their pimp.
10 days after killing Demetrius Twitty, the women think they may get away with murder. But DeKalb County police are called when a suspicious business owner overhears them in the bathroom, plotting to rob the place.
They actually tried to flush their weapons. They were arrested right there at the restaurant.
Police run the tags on their vehicle in the parking lot and trace it back to Demetrius Twitty. And the next day, when they question Falicia about why she's in possession of a dead man's car, she tells police everything.
She took complete responsibility for it. She took responsibility for it herself, and she said she was the shooter.
Not only does she tell them about Demetrius Twitty, but also about the murders of Ray Goodman and Doc Christmas, and the maiming of the Orlando man, Frederick Calloway.
This was a woman who had been destroyed by Marcus, completely subjugated and humiliated and made to feel less than zero.
Amisha admits to assisting Falicia while robbing all three victims.
Amisha also admitted her part in the killings, but what is unfortunate for both girls is that neither of them made any mention of their pimp's involvement in their behavior.
Hours later, her mother is shocked when Felicia's face is plastered on the nightly news.
I broke down and cried, prayed. Tried to find out where she was at. The first time I saw her, she was in DeKalb County Jail. She's sorry. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. I asked her, you okay? She said she's doing the best she could.
Even behind bars, Falicia stands by Marcus, not letting on why she committed the crimes.
He took control of her when she was 16 years old, young and impressionable, and he groomed her, and he got her to be dependent, and he threatened her, he scared her, he destroyed her as a person. And so even though she was now facing this tremendous legal pressure, she still protected him and gave herself up.
A year and a half after her arrest, Falicia Blakely pleads guilty to multiple counts of armed robbery and murder.
She's 18 years old with a small child, and she's facing the death penalty, all because she wanted to please her man.
Amisha Irvin also pleads guilty to robbery and murder. They're each sentenced to life in prison. No charges are ever brought against the pimp who sanctioned it all.
He was arrested for some other trashy little stuff, but he's never been prosecuted. But he all but pulled the trigger. And he's still out there on the streets, still doing it.
Since sentencing, Falicia and Marcus have exchanged a series of letters over the years.
In a blind sense, crazy sense, she loved him, and she still does. And I don't understand why.
Despite her soft spot for her man, Falicia expresses deep remorse for her actions.
In court, she apologized to the families of her victims and hoped that they would forgive her.
She will talk to anyone, anywhere, to discourage girls from getting themselves in these kinds of situations, to see the dangers of this, and to try to prevent somebody else, some other young girl, from getting in this kind of a trap.
I have my daughter back, even though she's in prison. She's not the person that she was when she's in the street. I miss her. If I could see her every day, I would. I wish she was home.
Falicia Blakely regrets doing her man's dirty work, and she's not the only woman wishing she had done things differently. Kiesha Smith also got mixed up with a man who sent her into a downward spiral. In San Bernardino, California, Kiesha enters a rough life from birth.
She never really knew her father.
Kiesha was living with her mom, had a lot of problems with her, wasn't the greatest of places to be growing up.
Despite her broken home life, Kiesha wants to make something of herself. She dreams of opening her own hair salon one day. So at the age of 19, she starts attending Valley Junior College. That's where she meets fellow classmate 19-year-old Mike Mitchell.
Kiesha was the kind of girl who was timid, docile, shy, and reserved. She was very to herself. Mike overwhelmed her with his outgoing charisma and charming personality.
My name is Mike. They had an almost instant connection. Almost love at first sight.
That was a big boost to her ego. I think it was validation. It made her important.
But Mike and Kiesha couldn't be any more different. While she strives to make good grades, Mike uses campus life to expand his business.
Mike Mitchell had been dealing drugs for years. He used his big personality to sell drugs.
But that doesn't turn Kiesha away. Mike has her full attention.
Mike, he knew what he wanted. He was kind of a businessman. He was strong, and that's exactly the kind of guy that Kiesha Smith was looking for.
Even though Mike's choices with the ladies are endless, he puts his all into courting Kiesha.
Mike and Kiesha, in the early stages of dating, had a very affectionate and safe relationship. They rode the bus to and from school together. They walked to class together. They spent a lot of time together.
Just being young college students in love.
Kiesha quickly learns that trying to hold on to him will change everything about her forever.
She let him mold her into whatever he wanted her to be.
All right, so that's one pair of glasses.
Yep.
With prescription lenses, plus anti-reflective lens coating.
Oh.
Scratch-resistant coating.
Did I choose?
UV protection. Award-winning customer service.
That's me.
That's also me. Free returns, free exchanges, and free frame adjustments for life.
And how much more is that?
Oh, it's all included at Warby Parker.
So my glasses
are still just $95.
Oh.
Surprise! I just get excited.
Your glasses can change the way you see the world. They can be bold, polished, complex, or unexpected. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker. Or maybe your perspective is artful, simple, sharp, and classic. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker, starting at $95, including prescription lenses.
All my love scattered everywhere.
When he looked at me, I just melted.
Dreams so sweet turned into a nightmare.
I didn't suspect that he was a straight-out killer demon. I knew I was in trouble. That's a hell of a price to pay. Just for one damn man.
Timid 19-year-old Kiesha Smith is falling in love with 19-year-old classmate and drug dealer Mike Mitchell. 8 months into the relationship, Kiesha is ready to pick out her wedding dress. But the honeymoon phase is over for Mike, who finds himself longing for the thrill of his single days.
Kiesha notices that they're not spending as much time together, and Mike is not really paying as close attention to her.
Kiesha was already on probation, so that inner voice of hers, that conscience, probably whispered to her, don't get involved in illicit activities because you can go to jail. But her love for Mike was so overriding, it dampened that voice that said, do the right thing.
2 months into Kiesha's probation, she and Mike start casing houses, looking for the right one to rob.
They looked in the middle-class areas of San Bernardino where they thought they can get the most money, the most jewelry, or the most merchandise.
But Mike thinks they need more intel before choosing the right house. And Kiesha knows just who to ask.
Kiesha recommended a woman from her apartment complex, Sherry Beck, who she knew dealt in stolen merchandise.
Sherry had a reputation for using drugs, selling drugs, and stealing things to get more drugs.
In exchange for drugs, Sherry agrees to help, and she has the perfect house in mind.
Sherry was upset with her drug dealer, Derek Hassett. She felt like he had ripped her off, and she wanted to get back at him, so she recommended his house.
Sherry invites them to case the house and rides the couple past the place, pointing out all possible entry points. But she has one word of caution.
Sherry warned Mike and Kiesha that Derek lives at home with his parents and his grandmother. However, Sherry knew that most of the family was out of the house during the day, and she believed that she could lure Derek away from the house if she wanted to.
The next morning, partners Mike and Kiesha put their plan in motion. They park down the street from Derek's house and anxiously wait for Sherry to do her part.
Sherry went to Derek's house to distract him, talk to him, lure him, whatever she has to do. Mike and Kiesha are in the car watching the house.
Sherry was having trouble getting Derek to leave the house, so she was with him longer than expected. Mike drove past several times and began to get impatient.
And when Sherry fails to get Derek to leave, she splits.
Sherry told Mike and Kiesha that Derek wasn't leaving, and on top of that, the grandmother was still in the house. Sherry told them they should forget it.
Determined to keep their plan in play, Mike and Kiesha ignore her advice. And hasty Mike is about to lead Kiesha into the biggest blunder of her life.
There was no turning back. At that point, she had to prove that she was his ride or die.
She bought into this whole Bonnie and Clyde duo, and she would do anything just to make him happy.
All my love scattered everywhere.
When he looked at me, I just melted.
Dreams so sweet turned into a nightmare.
I didn't suspect that he was a straight-out killer demon. I knew I was in trouble.
I've been going crazy.
That's a hell of a price to pay. Just for one damn man.
In San Bernardino, California, just 10 months into Kiesha Smith's relationship with Mike Mitchell, the two are casing a house to rob, waiting for its owner to take off so they can go in.
So Mike and Kiesha are now driving back and forth, trying to figure out why Derek hasn't left the house yet. They're becoming upset.
They continue to stake out the house, and an hour later, to their relief, Derek finally leaves.
They got into the house because the back patio door wasn't locked.
Mike and Kiesha started ransacking the house. They turned the house upside down.
After cleaning out several rooms, Kiesha and Mike head to the back bedroom. That's where they startle Derek's grandmother, Josephine Kelly.
Please don't hurt me.
Mike threw a pillowcase to Kiesha and told Kiesha to put the pillowcase over the grandmother's head.
Don't hesitate. We don't have time.
No, I'm not doing this to her.
Keisha was the one at a higher risk because she was out on probation. She actually had more to lose.
This would be the very last opportunity that Kiesha would have to turn away and change her mind.
But Kiesha does as Mike asks. She places the pillowcase over Josephine's head.
Kiesha had pledged her allegiance to Mike and would do whatever it is that he needed or wanted. Even though she was on probation and the specter of her getting in trouble was near, she was just willing to go by her heart, to please her man, even if it meant harming an elderly woman.
Unbeknownst to Kiesha, Mike is carrying a gun. He slowly draws the weapon and points it in Josephine's direction.
For Kiesha, this was a game changer. She never knew that there was going to be a weapon involved, and she certainly didn't think anybody was going to get hurt, especially a 90-year-old woman.
Kiesha stands back and watches in horror as Mike strikes Josephine with the gun, after which Josephine remains motionless.
One of the most heinous things that you can do is to attack a defenseless senior citizen. So when Kiesha and Mike attacked Josephine, at this point, Kiesha knew that she was in over her head. After all, this is a young woman who had no history of any violence in her life. So now she was scared. Now she was in shock. Now
Or unexpected. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker. Or maybe your perspective is artful, simple, sharp, and classic. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker, starting at $95, including prescription lenses.
It wasn't only Mike's charm that Kiesha loved. She was also falling for his family. And she was falling hard.
Mike's house, it was a full house. He had his mom, had his stepdad, new baby sister. Mike seemingly had a real family. These are the types of things that Kiesha wished that she had when she was growing up. So this really drew her in.
Three weeks after San Bernardino, California couple Mike Mitchell and Kiesha Smith kill 90-year-old Josephine Kelly, the hammer comes down on them.
Police were suddenly at the door of Mike's mother. They raided the house, and lo and behold, they found stolen items from Josephine Kelly's house.
The police found jars of coins, foreign currency, and jewelry that had been missing from Josephine's house.
They also found Kiesha hiding in a closet.
His mother is shocked at what they're accusing her son of, but fast-talking Mike has an explanation for how the goods ended up with him.
Mike explained that he had done a deal with Sherry Beck, drugs for merchandise. Now, he wasn't sure where this stuff came from and says that he wasn't sure if it was stolen.
Because their star witness, Sherry Beck, is a known thief and drug addict, police aren't prepared to make the other charge stick, so they charge Mike with possession of stolen property. Kiesha is also arrested and charged with a probation violation. And in a stunning blow, Mike is released 15 days later on bail.
The prosecutor, in their discretion, felt that the evidence that was gathered was not enough to connect Mike, Sherry, or Kiesha with the murder of Josephine Kelly. The prosecutor did not decide to charge or prosecute. The case went cold.
Kiesha remains behind bars, and a few weeks later, she's sentenced for her initial burglary charge. She receives 4 years in prison. Her solace is knowing that Mike is still by her side, but it doesn't last long.
Initially, when Kiesha started serving time, Mike was visiting her in jail, but the visits became less and less frequent.
Eventually, Mike didn't see Kiesha at all. Mike moved on with his life, got another girlfriend, had a child, and got married.
Kiesha could have made a plea deal to get a lesser sentence in her burglary case, but she stands by her man. When she's released from prison 4 years later, she doesn't reach out to Mike and remains mum.
Remarkably, Kiesha still refused to tell authorities his role in the robbery and the murder of Josephine Kelly. Her loyalty to him remained.
She could have easily turned on Mike and Sherry, but she never did because she loved Mike. She was in that for the long haul. She wanted to continue to prove that she loved her man.
Kiesha threw her life away. At the end of the day, she was with someone who really didn't care for her anymore, who wouldn't even visit her in jail, who in fact just let her rot in prison.
But Mike's luck will eventually run out. 8 years after the murder, the San Bernardino police reopened the murder case of Josephine Kelly. They offer a $10,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. That's when a witness contacts police.
The 10 grand reward apparently was enough for Mike's...
Basically gave her nothing. And now she's paying for it with the rest of her life.
Kiesha loved Mike so much that it made her blind to her own choices and responsibility. It ultimately killed her dreams and everything that she wanted to be, all for this man.
Young Patricia Russa thinks she knows the meaning of the word love until she meets a man who redefines her entire world.
It seems pretty clear that Bernice and Patricia were dependent on each other.
But her loyalty is put to the test when the dream romance becomes a tragic nightmare.
We just don't get calls like this on an everyday basis.
Whatever the situation was, she would still stand by him, ride or die.
And later, in Raleigh, North Carolina, aspiring actress Amanda Hayes is ready to be back in the spotlight after a series of failed marriages.
It didn't matter what was going on. Amanda always had to be the center of attention.
Though her dreams of stardom are quickly squashed when she meets a man who forces her into the role of cold-blooded killer.
She made a mistake in trusting you, and that blindness is what brought down the final curtain on Amanda.
She threw it all away because she thought that this was a guy that she couldn't live without.
There are hundreds of thousands of women in prison at any given time in the U.S. These are the true stories of women who committed heinous crimes in the name of love. For my man.
The humid, salt-heavy atmosphere of a Miami July does not allow secrets to decompose quietly. It traps them under a heavy blanket of tropical condensation, forcing the stench of old corruption to simmer just beneath the surface of the neon-soaked skyline. For 24 years, the vanishing of 22-year-old criminal justice intern Elena Vance was treated by the upper echelons of the Miami-Dade Police Department as a tragic, textbook case of a late-night highway abduction, a young woman whose vehicle stalled on the edge of the lonely, mangrove-choked Alligator Alley during a torrential summer storm, swallowed by the black waters of the Everglades or targeted by a transient interstate drifter who left no tire marks on the flooded asphalt. The official 2002 file was a masterclass in procedural misdirection, packed with hundreds of pages of dead-end leads, manufactured tips from compromised street informants, and high-intensity public relations sweeps designed to project an image of aggressive, transparent investigation while systematically burying the true physical timeline of her final hours. The community carried the memory of that missing student as a permanent warning sign on the edge of the swamp, telling themselves that the darkness had come from the outside world, a random strike from the chaotic underbelly of the highway system. But the rot didn't cruise into the city from the interstate, and it didn't emerge from the black mud of the Everglades. It sat comfortably behind the polished gold shields, the air-conditioned interrogation rooms, and the high-density data fortresses of the central headquarters itself. It took the agonizing respiratory collapse of a legendary, retired homicide commander in a hospice wing 70 miles north to finally puncture that blue concrete barrier, unleashing a torrent of deathbed audio files and classified internal logbooks that exposed a multi-decade cover-up that shattered the moral sanity of the regional law enforcement apparatus. The physical reality of the original 2002 crime scene on the perimeter of the Palmetto Expressway was an engineered void, a vacuum of evidence that had been meticulously swept clean before the first independent patrol unit could even log the location into the county computer core. When Elena's silver sedan was discovered idling on the shoulder at 3:15 a.m. on July 14, 2002, the vehicle was in a state of pristine, unnatural mechanical order. The hazard lights were blinking a slow cadence through the tropical downpour. Her leather purse rested undisturbed on the passenger seat with her student identification card exposed, and the keys were still spinning slowly in the ignition cylinder, yet the internal climate controls were set to maximum cold, and the driver's side window was rolled precisely 4 inches down. The responding field technicians, operating under the direct personal supervision of then-Captain Arthur Pendleton, a highly decorated, iron-fisted leader whose reputation for closing complex homicide operations had made him a political untouchable in the district, clumsily contaminated the exterior door frames with low-grade chemical dusting powders, completely destroying any potential latent friction ridges or modern biological skin cells that could have identified the person who manipulated the steering wheel. Paranoia settled over the university campus like a thick mantle of humid soot. Young female students who had viewed the department's internship programs as a pathway to public service suddenly withdrew their credentials, looking at every marked cruiser, every tactical officer, and every high-ranking commander as a potential manifestation of the predator. Yet, despite thousands of man-hours spent checking the registries of local salvage yards and interviewing known sexual offenders across the Tri-County area, the official narrative slammed into an iron wall of absolute administrative silence. As the decades bled into each other, the vanishing of Elena Vance mutated into a grim piece of local law enforcement folklore, a cautionary tale whispered by veteran precinct detectives to incoming rookies during late-night shift changes at the Area 4 substation. Elena's mother, a retired high school guidance counselor, spent her entire life savings on private investigators and independent digital forensic audits, exhausting her physical health and her financial reserves before dying brokenhearted in a quiet coastal town in 2018. Her daughter's final criminal procedure textbooks kept wrapped in archival plastic beneath her bed. Meanwhile, right inside the executive suites of the central headquarters, the career of Arthur Pendleton ascended to historic heights, with the commander retiring in 2015 beneath a wave of public adulation, a copper plaque bearing his name mounted directly into the marble foundation of the department's training academy on Northwest 36th Street. He was an institution above suspicion, a silver-haired patriarch whose quiet retirement in a secluded waterfront estate in Jupiter was viewed as a well-earned reward for a lifetime of unyielding devotion to the preservation of urban order, while his private home safe, sealed behind a false electrical panel in his wood-paneled study, held the literal, digitized blueprints of the conspiracy. The operational turning point materialized with the quiet, terminal admission of Pendleton into the intensive care unit of the Jupiter Medical Center in the spring of 2026, his lungs failing from advanced, irreversible pulmonary fibrosis. Knowing that his central nervous system was slipping into a state of permanent hypoxic collapse and that his immense legal immunity would no longer protect him from the ultimate ledger of human mortality, the former commander summoned an independent federal prosecutor to his bedside, refusing to permit his old department comrades or his corporate defense lawyers to enter the room. For 48 continuous hours, while the medical monitors beeped in a regular, frantic cadence through the sterile hospital air, Pendleton spoke into a high-fidelity digital audio recorder, his voice a dry, gravelly, monotone whisper that dismantled 24 years of departmental deception with the cold, analytical detachment of a research scientist. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he didn't weep for the ruined lineage of the Vance family, and his trembling hands didn't shake as he signed the final pages of his affidavit. He merely wanted the world to understand the absolute perfection of the system he had engineered to shield his own son. The deathbed recordings revealed that the true architect of the 1978 slaughterhouse was not a transient highway phantom or an anonymous predator from the swamp, but Pendleton's youngest son, Julian, a 24-year-old patrol officer who had been assigned to the exact same sector where Elena Vance was executing her field research on the night of July 14, 2002. Julian had utilized his marked departmental unit and his flashing blue emergency bars to pull Elena's vehicle over on the shoulder of the expressway, using his uniform and his golden shield as a psychological lever to force her out of the vehicle and into the rear cage of his cruiser before she could even register the threat. When the young intern resisted his physical advances inside an unmonitored maintenance shed behind the county fleet yards, Julian struck her down with an tire iron he had taken from his unit's emergency trunk kit, her arterial blood spraying across the cinderblock walls of the facility before he loaded her body back into the cruiser and drove straight to his father's private residence for administrative instructions. Captain Pendleton did not arrest his son. He did not call the homicide desk, and he didn't notify the state's attorney. He mobilized a private, deep-cover network of 5 loyal precinct commanders, a group known within the department as the Blue Wall Syndicate, who systematically took control of the dispatch logs, intercepted the primary evidence drapes, and buried the internal security camera tapes from the fleet yards inside a secure, off-site data server that was entirely insulated from the public courts. The logistical genius of Arthur Pendleton's cover-up was realized during the 72 hours following the execution. He did not attempt to bury Elena's remains in a shallow grave in the Everglades, which would have left a highly visible trail of tire tracks and mud for independent federal rangers to discover once the weather cleared. Instead, utilizing his administrative authority over the county's seized asset storage yards, he had her body loaded into a high-density industrial polymer drum, filled the interior with 500 pounds of liquid chemical alkaline solutions designed to dissolve organic bone matter down to a sterile calcium slurry, and stored the container inside a locked, high-security evidence vault containing seized narcotics from international maritime operations. He then took her car keys, her cell phone, and her credit cards, orchestrating a sequence of digital pings and manual ATM withdrawals across the state line in Georgia, using a dirty undercover operative to convince the media that she had left the state voluntarily or been abducted by an interstate human trafficking ring. When the independent state investigators finally managed to access the vehicle tracking records months later, they found themselves staring at an engineered technological maze, a cold case file that pointed toward Atlanta and Charlotte, while the literal molecular remains of the victim were sitting right inside the Central Police Headquarters, hidden behind a green plastic inventory tag signed by the captain himself. The technical confirmation of this deathbed confession was completed by a specialized, external federal forensic task force that descended upon the Miami-Dade evidence storage facility less than 6 hours after Pendleton's heart monitor registered his final flatline. Operating under a high-priority federal racketeering warrant signed by a U.S. Supreme Court justice, the independent agents bypassed the local precinct guards, drilled out the biometric locks on the historic narcotics vaults, and located the industrialized polymer container bearing the faded 2002 inventory number. Dr. Linda Torres, brought in from the Latent Technology Center to supervise the molecular archaeology of the site, utilized advanced microcentrifuge filtration arrays and high-density single nucleotide polymorphism sequencing engines to analyze the yellow-tinted, calcified sediment at the base of the drum. The molecular sequencers took less than 24 hours to deliver an absolute 1 in a billion match against the historic reference swabs preserved from Elena Vance's childhood dental records. The biological ghost had survived 24 years of chemical erasure to sign the execution order of the Blue Wall. The news broke across the sun-bleached avenues of Miami like a massive structural explosion, dominating the national media landscapes as the headline flashed across millions of digital displays. Miami 2002 cold case solved. Deathbed confession uncovers massive police cover-up. Citizens gathered outside the Central Justice Complex on Northwest 12th Avenue in a state of collective, catatonic rage, staring at the concrete facade of the building where a killer had spent 2 decades collecting a municipal paycheck while his father's copper monument sat mounted in the courtyard below. Inside the federal detention cells, Julian Pendleton, now a 48-year-old internal affairs sergeant who had climbed the ranks of the department beneath his father's protective shadow, sat in absolute, unblinking silence, his hands bound in high-tensile steel restraints, his face an empty mask of narcissistic collapse as the federal prosecutors laid out the racketeering and capital murder indictments. He had outrun the local detectives, he had outlived his victims' parents, and he had used the very shield of public justice to guard his trophies, completely blind to the fact that his father's terminal fear of the afterlife would eventually break the seal on his fortress. The legacy of the 2002 Miami cold case is now written in the annals of American jurisprudence, not as a simple story of interstate highway violence, but as a terrifying, definitive monument to the systemic dangers of absolute institutional authority, an unerasable proof that the most impenetrable walls of silence are not built by back-alley syndicates or international cartels, but by the very men and women who swear an oath to stand between the community and the dark. The Central Police Training Academy stands quiet now, its historic copper plaque torn from the marble foundations by pneumatic chisels, the white stone dust of the erased names settling over the plaza like old coastal salt, while the young recruits move through the corridors in a state of muted, hypervigilant suspicion. The memory of Elena Vance has finally been pulled out of the green plastic evidence drum and brought into the light of absolute judicial truth, a stark, uncompromising warning that no matter how deep an atrocity is buried inside the machinery of the state, no matter how many decades of administrative protection are applied to a lie, the truth remains an undegradable force, waiting in the dark for the final, terminal breath that will tear down the temples of the corrupt and bring the ghosts of the Blue Wall home for their final, terrifying reckoning. The geographic geometry of South Florida's infrastructure is a fragile, artificial grid slashed through the heart of an uncompromising wilderness. In July of 2002, the outer perimeter of the Palmetto Expressway did not represent the radiant, neon-soaked playground of modern travel. It was a dark, industrial frontier where the hyperdense asphalt of the metropolitan highway system met the silent, black expanse of the Everglades. When a tropical depression stalls over the Everglades, the air becomes a suffocating, pressurized matrix of heat and water, a heavy tropical condensation that traps the sound of the urban landscape beneath a gray ceiling of low-flying clouds. The rain falls in blinding, vertical sheets, drowning out the ambient hum of distant city traffic and reducing visibility to a sequence of fractured, watery shapes. It was within this specific atmospheric vacuum, where the flashing yellow warning signals of the highway construction zones were completely swallowed by the darkness, that an internal predator utilized the absolute authority of a marked municipal unit to turn a standard roadside assistance stop into a permanent administrative erasure. Elena Vance was 22 years old, a brilliant, hyper-focused criminal justice senior at Florida International University who had spent her summer executing an intensive field research internship with the county's Juvenile Rehabilitation Division. She was a young woman of unshakable civic faith, a student who viewed the polished gold shields of the local law enforcement apparatus not merely as symbols of public safety, but as a righteous, moral architecture designed to protect the vulnerable from the chaotic underbelly of the city. Her silver sedan was her mobile office, its rear seat stacked with loose-leaf textbooks on criminal procedure, folders of statistical data on youth recidivism, and a small, pink-handled umbrella she kept tucked in the door pocket. On the night of July 13, 2002, as she completed her late-night data sweep at the North Side substation and steered her vehicle onto the entrance ramp of the westbound expressway, she moved with the serene confidence of a citizen who believed the night belonged to the keepers of the peace. She did not know that her silver sedan had been selected as a target miles before her engine began to fail, tracked through the watery lens of a rearview mirror by a man whose uniform functioned as a supreme license to hunt. Officer Julian Pendleton was 24 years old in the summer of 2002, a highly aggressive, second-generation patrolman whose field record was a paradoxical ledger of high-velocity felony arrests and quiet, internal misconduct complaints that were systematically purged from the central database before they could ever reach the civilian review boards. Julian was the youngest son of Captain Arthur Pendleton, the legendary, iron-fisted commander of the Area 4 Homicide Bureau, whose deep political connections inside the county courthouse made him an unassailable patriarch of the department. Julian moved through a sector with the absolute, arrogant immunity of a prince who had been taught from childhood that the laws of the Commonwealth were flexible guidelines meant to control the public, while the internal blue wall was an iron fortress designed to protect the bloodline. The tactical mechanics of the interception were executed with a clinical simplicity that left no room for defensive suspicion. At 2:45 a.m., as the torrential summer downpour flooded the lower drainage basins of the Palmetto Expressway, Elena's vehicle suffered a sudden, catastrophic loss of electrical power, a mechanical failure that the subsequent federal forensic audits would suggest was caused by a highly specific, localized severing of the primary alternator wiring harness while the car was parked at the substation. As her engine sputtered and died on the dark shoulder of the highway, miles away from the nearest brightly lit convenience store, the blinding blue emergency light bars of Julian Pendleton's marked cruiser materialized through the gray wall of rain, casting a rhythmic, hyper-intense strobe across the flooded asphalt. Elena did not panic. She rolled the driver's side window down precisely 4 inches to allow the cool, air-conditioned air of her cabin to meet the humid swamp breeze outside, her hand automatically reaching for her student identification badge to present to the officer who was stepping out of the blue light. Julian Pendleton did not approach the vehicle with the standard, cautious posture of a highway patrolman. He walked with a loose, confident stride, his heavy black utility boots slicing through the standing water, his yellow raincoat slick with oil residue. He used his official, high-powered flashlight to blind the young intern through the wet glass, his voice a calm, authoritative drone that commanded her to step out of the vehicle and into the rear cage of his cruiser for an emergency transport away from the rising floodwaters of the shoulder. "The highway is closing due to a structural washout 2 miles ahead, miss," Julian said, his gloved hand resting casually against the heavy polymer grip of his service weapon as he opened her door, his face framed by the dark visor of his uniform cap. "We need to clear this sector before the drainage ditches overflow. Leave your purse on the seat. My unit will secure the vehicle until the municipal tow trucks arrive at dawn." The moment Elena Vance stepped out of her vehicle and into the rear compartment of the cruiser, her civil existence was effectively terminated. The interior door handles of a marked police transport cage are non-functional by design, an engineering parameter meant to isolate violent felons that, in this instance, functioned as an absolute, state-sanctioned kidnapping cage. Julian did not steer the cruiser toward the main exit ramp leading to the university campus or the downtown's central booking facility. He turned the vehicle north, navigating a series of dark, unpaved service roads that wound through the industrial perimeter of the county fleet maintenance yards, a vast, isolated labyrinth of rusted diesel tanks, decommissioned transit buses, and oil-stained concrete warehouses that sat entirely cut off from the public view by a 10-foot chain-link security fence. It was inside maintenance shed number 3, a drafty, corrugated iron structure used to store heavy machinery during the tropical storm season, that the physical confrontation occurred. When Elena realized that she had been guided into an unmonitored industrial dead zone rather than an official law enforcement sanctuary, her civic faith dissolved into an acute, primal state of survival terror. She fought with an explosive, desperate athletic ferocity, her fingernails clawing at the synthetic fabric of Julian's uniform shirt, her teeth biting deep into the leather of his utility gloves as he attempted to pin her against a concrete workbench. But the physical disparity was absolute. Enraged by her resistance, and knowing that a single scratch on his face could expose his presence to the morning shift logs, Julian reached for a heavy, 24-inch iron tire iron from his cruiser's emergency storage kit, bringing the metal bar down with crushing force against the side of her skull. The original field response, orchestrated less than 3 hours later by Captain Arthur Pendleton himself, was a historic demonstration of forensic destruction masquerading as an aggressive investigation. When the notification of an abandoned civilian vehicle on the expressway crossed the captain's private desk at 5 a.m., he did not dispatch the standard regional homicide team or permit the independent municipal traffic investigators to document the scene. He personally took command of the sector, deploying a small, tightly insulated cadre of loyal precinct supervisors who systematically cordoned off the Palmetto shoulder with multi-layered perimeter tape, effectively blocking the independent media trucks from getting within 500 yards of the silver sedan. The captain's team spent 2 hours inside the vehicle before the official crime scene photographs were taken. They wiped down the steering wheel with specialized chemical solutions that neutralized latent fingerprints while appearing to search for trace fibers. They adjusted the internal climate controls to maximum cold to obscure the precise time of the vehicle's abandonment, and they carefully arranged Elena's purse and student ID on the passenger seat to construct a clean, theatrical narrative of a sudden, mysterious highway abduction by an anonymous, transient predator. By the time the sun broke through the tropical clouds on the morning of July 14th, the official file was an engineered void, a cold case script that directed the public's attention toward the infinite, dark expanses of the Everglades, while the physical truth of her destruction was being loaded into an unmarked cargo van behind the central precinct garage. The tropical humidity of South Florida acts as a relentless accelerant of organic decay, a thick, moisture-laden atmosphere that forces traditional forensic investigators to work against an accelerated biological clock. But when the architect of a concealment operation possesses the total, unyielding administrative authority of a bureau chief, the environmental factors are no longer an obstacle. They are integrated directly into a cold, mechanical equation of erasure. By the third week of July 2002, the vanishing of Elena Vance had been successfully transformed by the Area 4 Homicide Bureau into a permanent media spectacle, a chaotic, high-intensity public relations diversion that kept the local television cameras focused on the muddy canal banks of Tamiami Trail, while the true chemical destruction of her identity was being executed inside the high-security evidence repositories of the Central Justice Complex itself. To understand the systemic absolute horror of the Vance cover-up, one must visualize the interior topography of the Miami-Dade Central Property and Evidence Facility as it existed in the early 2000s. It was not a simple basement storage room with cardboard boxes and metal shelving. It was a massive, 3-story windowless concrete fortress located on the industrial periphery of Northwest 36th Street, designed to hold hundreds of thousands of individual items harvested from the city's high-velocity drug wars and violent cartel homicides. The building was a legal dead zone, operating under a dense, bureaucratic inventory system that could only be accessed, updated, or audited by a small, tightly insulated cadre of senior logistics officers who answered directly to Captain Arthur Pendleton. It was an environment where a multi-million-dollar shipment of international cocaine could vanish from a ledger with a single clerical stroke, and it was the perfect sanctuary for a father seeking to dissolve the physical evidence of his son's capital atrocity. On the evening of Tuesday, July 16, 2002, 48 hours after Elena's silver sedan was discovered idling on the Palmetto shoulder, Captain Pendleton utilized his private, high-security electronic access token to enter the facility's subterranean narcotics processing wing at 11:45 p.m. A window when the evening shift change left the central monitoring corridors completely deserted. He did not arrive with a clandestine team of street operatives. He walked alone, his polished leather uniform shoes clicking with a slow, deliberate cadence against the gray epoxy floors. He was a man of immense, terrifying administrative presence, his silver hair neatly parted beneath his uniform cap, his gold command bars catching the harsh glare of the fluorescent tubes. He carried a multi-page, falsified asset seizure manifest that authorized the immediate transport and storage of a high-density industrial chemical storage drum, classified under a bogus federal maritime smuggling index. Waiting inside the cargo elevator bay was Julian Pendleton, his youngest son, his patrol uniform replaced by the dark denim work clothes of an off-duty fleet mechanic. Between them on a heavy hydraulic pallet jack sat a 55-gallon, reinforced industrial polymer storage drum, a high-density polyethylene container designed to transport hazardous industrial acids and volatile chemical solvents without suffering structural leakage or atmospheric venting. The drum had been harvested from a decommissioned county water treatment facility 3 hours prior, its exterior surface completely scrubbed of any original corporate labeling and replaced with a prominent, green plastic inventory tag bearing a forged case number from an active international narcotics trafficking investigation. The interior contents of that polymer drum represented the absolute, chilling apex of Arthur Pendleton's forensic pathology. He did not attempt to commit the amateur blunder of burying Elena's body in the shifting, unpredictable mud of the Everglades, an environment where seasonal water fluctuations, construction grading, or the migratory patterns of deep swamp wildlife could expose a bone fragment to a federal park ranger within a matter of months. He had spent 30 years studying the failures of the city's most sophisticated murderers, and he understood that the only permanent grave is one that completely alters the chemical state of organic matter. Before the drum was sealed, Captain Pendleton personally introduced 500 pounds of commercial-grade granular sodium hydroxide, lye, combined with a localized solution of highly concentrated liquid potassium hydroxide, creating a hyperalkaline chemical matrix that was technically capable of executing an accelerated alkaline hydrolysis. It was a process that did not rely on the volatile, high-scent mechanics of fire or industrial incineration, which would have triggered the thermal sensors and smoke alarms of the facility's ventilation system. Instead, the chemical cocktail worked in absolute, freezing silence inside the sealed polymer shell, systematically breaking down the proteins, the lipids, and the cellular structures of the human body, turning the vibrant identity of the 22-year-old student into a sterile, completely odorless, dark brown calcium liquid within 72 hours. The logistical genius of this placement was total. The drum was rolled into Vault Section 4 Delta, a restricted, temperature-controlled storage vault reserved for historical, unadjudicated international maritime narcotics seizures that had been locked under federal injunction since the mid-1980s. It was a zone that no ordinary precinct detective, no internal affairs investigator, and no civilian grand jury could ever cross without a direct, written clearance from the chief of the Homicide Bureau himself. The container was positioned directly beneath a massive industrial cooling vent, its green plastic inventory tag matching a dummy file in the central mainframe that listed the item as seized unrefined chemical precursors, case pending federal adjudication. The literal molecular remains of Elena Vance had been transformed into an anonymous piece of police property, guarded by the very security cameras, biometric locks, and armed guards that the citizens of the county paid to protect them. While the chemical erasure was finalizing its work in the dark of Vault 4 Delta, Captain Pendleton's secondary administrative network, the Blue Wall Syndicate, was actively constructing a multi-layered digital smoke screen across the state line. At 2 a.m. on July 17th, a dirty undercover narcotics operative working under Pendleton's personal payroll crossed the Georgia border inside a rental vehicle, carrying Elena's personal cell phone and her primary bank cards. Over the next 48 hours, this operative executed a sequence of deliberate, high-visibility digital transactions. He turned her phone on for 3 minutes outside a highway transit oasis in Valdosta, allowing the cellular towers to log a hard geographic ping that pointed away from the peninsula. He used her debit card to withdraw $300 from an automated teller machine at a truck stop outside Atlanta, and he dropped her Silver College keychain into the rear utility bin of an interstate bus terminal in Charlotte, North Carolina. These engineered pings flooded the area for investigative mainframe with a torrent of high-probability tracking data that completely paralyzed the instincts of the independent state investigators who were attempting to verify the initial highway timeline. The media swallowed the narrative with absolute, uncritical urgency, running primetime headlines that shifted the public focus from a potential local law enforcement anomaly to a terrifying interstate trafficking mystery. The news anchors mapped out her flight path across the southeastern United States, interviewing transient truck drivers and state troopers in 3 different jurisdictions, while the true killer, Julian Pendleton, sat in the air-conditioned comfort of the North Side substation, collecting his standard hazard pay and reviewing the daily tracking logs under the proud, silent supervision of his father. The psychological warfare executed against the Vance family during this period of manufactured confusion was a masterclass in bureaucratic cruelty. Every time Elena's mother, Miriam, arrived at the Central Justice Complex to demand an update on the cellular tracking files, she was guided into Captain Pendleton's private office, where the silver-haired commander would hold her hands, his voice dropping into a warm, deeply sorrowful baritone that projected the absolute perfection of paternal empathy. He would show her the falsified Georgia tracking maps, shake his head at the cruelty of the modern interstate corridors, and promise her on his golden shield that the department would never stop hunting the phantom trucker who had stolen her beautiful daughter from the side of the road. He used her grief as a continuous, real-time diagnostic tool, analyzing her statements to ensure that her independent private investigators hadn't stumbled upon the physical reality of the county fleet maintenance yards or the true timeline of the Palmetto Shoulder. For 13 years, that polymer drum sat undisturbed in the cold darkness of Vault 4 Delta, its green tag fading under the fluorescent lights, its internal liquid settling into a dense, mineralized calcium slurry that looked to the casual inventory clerks like ordinary industrial waste. Captain Pendleton retired in 2015, receiving the highest civic accommodations from the County Commission, his name etched into the marble foundations of the Police Training Academy as a testament to a lifetime of unyielding devotion to public order. He moved to a multi-million-dollar waterfront estate in Jupiter, completely secure in his belief that he had successfully rewritten history, outwitted the digital age, and buried his son's sin behind an unbreachable wall of chemical silence and administrative reverence. He did not know that the technological universe was developing a new kind of forensic architecture, a science of high-density molecular archaeology that could reach back through decades of structural deception to pull a ghost out of a sealed plastic drum. The ultimate undoing of a multi-decade institutional conspiracy does not begin with a dramatic, midnight raid or a sudden break in the street-level informant network. It initiates within the silent, temperature-regulated data centers of the federal justice system, where the unerasable digital footprints of old communication networks are systematically mapped by modern computational arrays. By the early spring of 2026, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Task Force, operating under a high-level Department of Justice authorization, had established a classified, off-site digital forensics lab on the upper floors of the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. This was a realm stripped entirely of traditional police theater. There were no dented metal desks, no half-empty coffee pots, and no tobacco-stained interview folders. Instead, the space was dominated by long rows of liquid-cooled servers, automated forensic software arrays, and data analysts who treated a 24-year-old law enforcement cover-up not as a human mystery, but as a compressed data processing problem waiting for the correct technological extraction keys. At the center of this technological offensive was Dr. Linda Torres, a 34-year-old molecular archaeologist and digital data specialist who had spent her professional career adapting high-density forensic analytics from historical cold cases to the pragmatic demands of modern public corruption investigations. To Dr. Torres, The cardboard boxes gathering dust in the deep property repositories of the Miami-Dade Police Department weren't just monuments to a tragic, unresolved human loss. They were historical data nodes holding the hidden, unread signatures of the city's most protected internal predators. When her unit initiated a comprehensive, automated audit of South Florida's unresolved disappearances from the pre-digital transition era, her attention was immediately locked onto the July 2002 vanishing of Elena Vance, the brilliant criminal justice intern whose vehicle had been found abandoned on the rain-slicked shoulder of the Palmetto Expressway. The Vance file attracted her analytical eye precisely because of the extreme, paradoxical cleanroom nature of the early investigative reports. The original homicide logs from 2002 detailed a complete absence of physical trace evidence inside and outside the silver sedan. No usable latent friction ridges on the door frames, no tire tracks in the mud of the shoulder despite a massive summer downpour, and no cellular transactional records that could establish her precise movements after she cleared the north side substation gate. The original investigators, operating under the direct personal command of Captain Arthur Pendleton, had concluded that a highly sophisticated, nomadic interstate predator had executed a perfect, trace-free roadside abduction, an assumption that Torres found behaviorally and logistically impossible given the hyperdense traffic patterns and the physical security checkpoints that governed the expressway grid even in the early 2000s. On March 14, 2026, the Digital Task Force bypassed the local county mainframes entirely, utilizing a federal grand jury subpoena to execute a total extraction of the historical, archived telecommunication packets and cell tower signaling logs that had been captured by regional service providers during the second week of July 2002. In the early 2000s, cellular technology was a primitive, binary-driven infrastructure compared to the high-density networks of 2026, but it possessed one critical, unalterable characteristic. Every time a mobile phone communicated with the network, it left a permanent, unerasable record of its presence on the historical signaling rails of the central switches. Data packets, known as Cell Site Location Information (CSLI), that were typically filed away into the deep corporate vaults of the telecom giants and forgotten by time. Torres loaded these raw, historical data streams into a specialized geospatial mapping algorithm known as Chronos Geo, a software platform designed to reconstruct the real-time physical trajectories of multiple electronic signatures simultaneously with microsecond accuracy. The original 2002 county investigation had claimed that Elena's mobile phone had permanently cleared the Miami-Dade basin at 4:15 a.m. on July 14th, logging its first out-of-state ping near a highway oasis in Valdosta, Georgia, 12 hours later. But as the federal algorithm began to process the deep, raw signaling logs from the original local cellular switches, it revealed a terrifying, high-definition electronic reality that completely demolished the official police narrative. The data indicated that at exactly 3:02 a.m. on July 14, 2002, while Elena's silver sedan was idling on the shoulder of the expressway, her mobile phone was not communicating with the highway network alone. It was locked into a continuous, high-density signaling loop with a secondary electronic signature, a heavy, high-output mobile radio and cellular unit registered directly to an active, marked Miami-Dade Police Patrol cruiser. The two signals did not merely cross paths, they merged, their geographic coordinates overlapping with absolute mathematical precision on the exact segment of the Palmetto shoulder where her car was later discovered by the morning shift. The federal software began to trace the trajectory of that police cruiser unit, mapping its movements through the gray, watery grid of the tropical downpour. The vehicle did not remain on the highway to execute a standard roadside assistance patrol. It accelerated northwest, navigating a series of unpaved, restricted service roads that cut through the industrial perimeter of the county fleet maintenance yards. The signaling records showed that the cruiser unit remained stationary inside maintenance shed number 3 for exactly 42 minutes, its internal communication array logging a series of 3 encrypted, high-priority data bursts to a private, non-listed telephone line registered directly to the personal residence of Captain Arthur Pendleton in Coral Gables. The digital infrastructure of 2002 didn't lie. It was simply buried by the people who controlled the local mainframe terminals, Dr. Torres said, her finger tracing the neon blue tracking lines as they populated her high-resolution display monitors. The original Homicide Bureau didn't run a real investigation. They executed an aggressive, administrative misdirection. They used their access to the early cellular databases to isolate the tracking files, delete the local cruiser pings from the county substations, and create a falsified Georgia data trail using a dirty undercover asset who carried her phone across the state line to blind the courts. The federal algorithm completed its tracking analysis, showing that at 4:35 a.m., the marked patrol unit emerged from the Fleet Yards and drove directly to the rear entrance of the Miami-Dade Central Property and Evidence Facility on Northwest 36th Street. The building's automated security logbooks from that night, which had been archived on old magnetic backup tapes in the basement of the state capitol, showed a complete administrative blank during that specific 2-hour window, a deliberate gap in the digital record that matched the exact time frame when Captain Pendleton had personally signed his private access token into the subterranean narcotics processing wing. The data loop was locking its teeth around the blue wall. The tracking profiles proved with mathematical certainty that the person who manipulated Elena Vance's physical perimeter on the night of her disappearance was an active, uniformed officer operating under the direct, real-time protection of the Homicide Bureau's highest commander. The federal prosecutors realized they were no longer dealing with a tragic, unresolved roadside mystery or a cold case file that had passed its expiration date. They were looking at an active, multi-decade criminal enterprise operating inside the absolute core of the regional justice system, a conspiracy that had utilized the public funds, the security codes, and the forensic equipment of the state to shield a killer and dissolve his victim in the dark. "We have the electronic skeleton of the cover-up," the lead federal prosecutor stated, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the mapping terminals as the data strings finalized their convergence. But an electronic trajectory won't convince a modern federal jury if the defense consortium claims the historical records are corrupted or misaligned by the service providers after 24 years of archival storage. We need the physical body. We need to breach the central evidence facility and locate that industrial polymer storage drum before the syndicate realizes we have pulled the digital blueprints of their sanctuary out of the dark. The physical atmosphere enveloping the exclusive waterfront enclave of Jupiter, Florida, during the second week of April 2026 was defined by a heavy, pre-summer stagnation, thick, salt-crusted humidity that rolled off the Atlantic Ocean and hung motionless within the manicured canopies of the royal palms. Along the private, gated stretches of the Loxahatchee River, the multi-million-dollar estates of retired corporate titans and high-ranking municipal legends stood like silent, stucco-faced fortresses, their pristine infinity pools and private yacht slips projecting an image of absolute security and hard-earned domestic peace. Wealthy residents in Linen Resort where navigated their golf carts through the hyper-manicured fairways of the adjacent country clubs. Private landscaping crews manicured the dense beds of imported hibiscus, and sleek, multi-engine center console boats glided silently through the coastal waterways. It was a sun-drenched sanctuary of historical preservation and unchecked privilege, a realm designed to insulate the elite from the gritty, high-velocity violence of the metropolitan South. But beneath this surface of serene luxury, a silent, deep-cover federal tactical surveillance web was tightening around the secluded estate at number 412 River Oakway. The active containment operation was directed from the rear cabin of an unmarked commercial marine research vessel anchored 300 yards out in the river channel, a high-stakes deployment commanded by Special Agent Marcus Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Task Force. Marcus was a 20-year veteran of the Bureau's elite Internal Affairs Division, a man whose career had been forged in the high-stress, low-visibility environment of dismantling entrenched political syndicates and tracking sophisticated white-collar fugitives across the eastern seaboard. He handled the mission with a cold, absolute clinical focus, entirely unswayed by the legendary status of the target he was monitoring. Through the tinted, specialized glass of the vessel's observation console, his eyes remained fixed on a high-definition real-time monitoring array that tracked every thermal signature emerging from the waterfront property. Yet, As he watched the digital telemetry refresh on his screens, his pulse ran with a sharp, professional tension. The operational parameters dictated by the Department of Justice were absolute, unyielding, and defined by a strict mandate of total passive observation. The field units, composed of plainclothes federal operators embedded on land, water, and within the local public service grids, were strictly forbidden from utilizing any traditional intrusive methods that could puncture the target's highly refined psychological comfort zone. They could not execute a wiretap on the estate's landlines because Captain Arthur Pendleton had disconnected his public communication cables months prior. They could not monitor his digital data traffic because the retired commander lived entirely offline, utilizing private couriers to manage his financial accounts, and they could not request a standard garbage pull from the curbside bins, as the private security force that patrolled River Oakway personally processed all domestic waste to protect the residents from corporate espionage. A single operational anomaly, a strange vessel idling too long in the river channel with its auxiliary engines running, a disguised utility worker asking specific questions about the estate's backup power systems, would be noticed instantly by the hypervigilant family, risking an immediate legal blockade or the destruction of the private archive hidden within the home before a federal grand jury could verify the digital matching data. The entire mission lived or died on a single, clean directive: secure continuous, high-definition visual and behavioral data on the dying patriarch while preparing the perimeter for an absolute forensic intervention. For 7 continuous days, the surveillance logs resembled a clinical case study in pristine, unassailable retirement. The target of the operation, 76-year-old retired homicide Captain Arthur Pendleton, was trapped within a physical decline that was as rapid as it was unyielding. Advanced, irreversible pulmonary fibrosis had compromised his central nervous system, reducing the once towering, iron-fisted ruler of the Area 4 Homicide Bureau to a fragile, oxygen-dependent shadow of his former administrative presence. Through the long-range thermal imaging lenses, Marcus watched the old man spend his mornings seated in a high-backed leather chair on the screen veranda overlooking his private dock, his long frame draped in an expensive cashmere blanket, his face obscured by a high-flow medical oxygen mask that hissed a continuous, rhythmic cadence into the stagnant river air. Beside him stood his youngest son, Sergeant Julian Pendleton of the Internal Affairs Division, the true killer of 2002, who had taken an extended administrative leave from his precinct command to act as his father's primary medical guardian. Julian moved through the estate with the loose, arrogant confidence of a man who believed the blue wall of silence was a permanent, cosmic guarantee. He was 48 years old, his silver hair neatly parted in imitation of his father's historic style, his civilian clothing failing to hide the distinct, rigid posture of an active police supervisor. Every afternoon at precisely 2 p.m., Julian would guide his father's motorized wheelchair down the paved concrete ramp toward the edge of the river channel, helping the dying patriarch breathe the salt-heavy air, while they watched the luxury yachts navigate the intercoastal waterway. To the casual boaters passing the estate, they appeared to be a beautiful, heartbreaking tableau of familial devotion, a highly decorated police family spending their final, quiet weeks together in the twilight of an unassailable public career. There was no somatic manifestation of an active guilty conscience, no erratic scanning of the riverbanks, no physical indicators that suggested these two men had spent 24 years guarding a high-density chemical tomb inside the Central Police repositories of Miami. They looked like the royalty of the old department, resting comfortably within a sanctuary built by their own historical immunity. The true logistical challenge for the federal surveillance team lay in Julian Pendleton's hypervigilant operational security routine, a pattern of behavior that Dr. Torres back in the downtown data centers began to classify not as filial devotion, but as a deeply calcified forensic countermeasure designed to shield the home from any form of technical penetration. Julian managed the estate like an active command post. He personally inspected the property lines 3 times a day, checking the exterior security cameras for any signs of physical tampering. He personally accepted all medical supplies and oxygen cylinder deliveries at the front security gate, cross-checking the credentials of the transport drivers against the state registry before allowing them to step onto the driveway. And he never permitted a single scrap of medical waste, a discarded medication vial, or a piece of correspondence to leave the interior of the house without personally shredding and incinerating the materials in a private outdoor fire pit behind the boathouse. He was a professional internal affairs investigator applying the full weight of his counter-surveillance training to protect the deathbed of the man who had saved him from the executioner's ledger in 2002. The critical fracture in this defensive perimeter occurred on Thursday, April 16, 2026, a day defined by a sudden, violent shift in the local atmospheric systems as a low-pressure front from the Caribbean collided with the intense heat of the Florida current, triggering a massive, blinding squall of tropical rain and heavy, opaque fog that completely blanketed the Loxahatchee River in a thick, gray wall of water. At 3:15 p.m., as the torrential downpour flooded the lower drainage canals of the River Oak Estate, a catastrophic electrical power surge, secretly induced by a high-frequency federal electromagnetic pulse device deployed against the local utility transformer station, knocked out the main power grid of the neighborhood, instantly plunging the Pendleton mansion into total darkness and disabling the automated security cameras that guarded the waterfront dock. The interior backup generators failed to engage immediately, a mechanical delay that the federal surveillance logs indicated was caused by a planned maintenance cycle Julian had initiated earlier that week. Inside the house, the sudden termination of the automated oxygen concentrator system triggered an acute, immediate medical crisis for the dying captain, his lungs gasping for air as his blood saturation levels dropped into the toxic danger zone. Marcus Vance watched through the specialized infrared thermal lenses as Julian panicked, his heat signature moving frantically through the dark hallways of the mansion to locate the manual backup oxygen cylinders stored in the rear utility room. Realizing that his father's respiratory system was slipping into a terminal hypoxic collapse that would end his life before he could sign an official judicial confession, Julian was forced to break his isolation routine. He rushed to his private vehicle, ignored the security gate controls, and drove at high speed through the blinding sheets of tropical rain toward the nearest specialized medical supply depot located on Indiantown Road, leaving the dying patriarch completely unattended inside the darkened estate for an estimated 20-minute window. Marcus Vance didn't waste a single millisecond of the operational breach. He signaled the walking tactical interception teams that had been staging inside a plain commercial delivery van parked 2 blocks away. Within 90 seconds of Julian's vehicle clearing the neighborhood entrance, 2 undercover federal operators dressed in the high-visibility yellow slickers of emergency municipal drainage technicians stepped smoothly through the tropical downpour, crossing the property line of number 412 River Oakway with a rapid, silent synchronization that left no trace on the flooded lawns. They bypassed the physical locks on the rear glass atrium, using a specialized pneumatic compression tool, entering the warm, silent interior of the master bedroom where Captain Arthur Pendleton lay gasping for breath beneath his linen blankets, his pale skin turning a dangerous shadow of blue in the dim light of the storm. They did not arrive to execute a violent arrest or to terminate the life of the legendary commander. They carried a compact, medical-grade emergency oxygen transport unit, sliding the pristine silicone mask over the dying man's face and activating a controlled flow of pure, high-pressure oxygen that immediately stabilized his respiratory cadence, bringing his vital signs back from the edge of a fatal flatline. As the captain's eyes cracked open, clear and unnaturally bright behind his wrinkled lids, he found himself looking not at his loyal son or a comforting family doctor, but into the cold, unyielding gaze of a federal public corruption agent who held an encrypted digital recording array inches from his face. "Captain Pendleton," the federal operator whispered, his voice a low, authoritative frequency that cut through the hiss of the oxygen valves like a razor. "Your son has left the perimeter. Your power is down, your cameras are dead, and the federal task force has already breached Vault 4 Delta in Miami. The polymer drum has been located. The molecular sequencers are processing Elena Vance's remains right now. The blue wall has dissolved. You have exactly 10 minutes of lucid consciousness remaining before your son returns with the tanks. You can die in this bed with your name attached to a capital murder conspiracy, or you can speak into this recorder and ensure that the system you built doesn't survive your funeral. The ledger is open, Captain. Sign your name." the old man lay perfectly still for 5 long seconds, the pure oxygen surging into his lungs, his brilliant blue eyes scanning the sterile walls of his bedroom as the reality of his absolute forensic defeat collided with his failing consciousness. The mention of Vault 4 Delta and the molecular processing of the polymer drum was the ultimate, inescapable silver bullet. It stripped away his ability to claim an administrative oversight. It rendered his 40-year career of respectability useless before it could protect his lineage. And it forced him to realize that the biological phantom he thought he had dissolved in sodium hydroxide 24 years ago had finally returned to tear down his palace. His mouth twisted into a slow, dry grimace that looked like a death rattle but was the final, terrifying activation of his administrative mind. He reached out his trembling, vein-streaked hand, wrapped his fingers around the casing of the Federal Recording Array, and began to speak his damnation into the dark. The digital capture of a dying commander's voice is not merely a record of human speech. It is a clinical extraction of historical data that immediately reorganizes the entire structural framework of a metropolitan justice system. On the afternoon of Thursday, April 16, 2026, inside the darkened, generator-stripped interior of the master bedroom at 412 River Oakway, the encrypted Federal Recording Array ran its binary cadence in absolute silence. The device sat balanced on the linen sheet beside Captain Arthur Pendleton's trembling right hand, its green indicator light throwing a steady, low-frequency pulse across the deeply wrinkled contours of his face. The air in the room was dense with a clean, cold aroma of pure pressurized oxygen and the underlying, salty dampness of the tropical squall that continued to lash the glass panels of the veranda outside. Arthur Pendleton did not speak with the frantic, emotional urgency of a sinner seeking religious absolution before his heart flatlines. He spoke with the slow, analytical, chillingly detached precision of a retired bureau chief delivering a final, master-level operational briefing to his senior staff. His voice, though reduced by pulmonary fibrosis to a dry, gravelly, monotone rasp, retained that historic, authoritative baritone that had dominated the Area 4 Homicide Bureau for over 3 decades. He did not look at the federal agents who stood like shadows beside his bed. His brilliant blue eyes remained fixed on the ceiling fans spinning slowly above him, his mind traversing 24 years of engineered files, falsified manifests, and tactical erasures. "You speak to me of constitutional rights and federal grand juries, young man," Pendleton murmured, his chest rising and falling in a tight, mechanical rhythm as the oxygen valve hissed into his mask. "You think you have executed a brilliant piece of detective work because your software highlighted a cellular tracking loop on the Palmetto grid. You don't possess the historical depth to realize that the tracking loop was an insignificant detail. The true perfection of the Vance operation lay in its total administrative integration. I didn't override the system to save my son. I used the active administrative protocols of the county to turn the system into his primary sanctuary." The deathbed recording, which would eventually be archived in the Library of Congress under the highest classification of domestic public corruption evidence, proceeded to dismantle 24 years of regional law enforcement history with a single, continuous stream of administrative self-indictment. Pendleton admitted that by 2 a.m. on July 14, 2002, his youngest son, Patrol Officer Julian Pendleton, had arrived at the family's private Coral Gables estate inside a marked sector cruiser, his uniform soaked with tropical rain and his hands carrying the distinct, deep scratches left behind by Elena Vance's final struggle inside maintenance shed number 3. The captain did not hesitate. He did not experience a moment of paternal moral crisis, and he did not seek the counsel of a defense lawyer. His brain, forged during the violent, high-velocity drug wars of the 1980s where the line between the cartels and the commands was a fluid financial border, immediately pivoted to a total containment strategy. He understood that if the Homicide Desk or the Internal Affairs Division initiated a standard, independent forensic processing of the Palmetto shoulder, the physical timeline would inevitably collide with his son's sector assignment sheets within 6 hours. An amateur offender runs from the jurisdiction, or he buries a body in the limestone of the swamp, thinking the dirt will guard his secret. Pendleton's rasping voice continued, a short, dry chuckle rattling inside his throat mask. But the swamp is a volatile, unscientific entity. It shifts with the seasonal water reclamation projects, and it responds to federal park rangers. The only permanent grave in a modern metropolitan county is an active, state-monitored evidence locker. If you want to make an object disappear forever, you don't hide it from the police. You label it as police property, you assign it a multi-layered inventory number, and you let the state's own armed guards and biometric security layers protect your vault for you. The tactical mechanics of the cover-up, as detailed by the dying commander, required the immediate mobilization of the Blue Wall Syndicate, a secret, deep-cover network of 5 loyal precinct commanders and senior logistics supervisors who owed their promotions, their private pensions, and their judicial immunities to Pendleton's historic patronage. At 3:30 a.m., while the tropical downpour was blinding the municipal surveillance grids, the supervisor of the Central Property and Evidence Facility, a core member of the syndicate, manually deactivated the internal closed-circuit backup tapes for a precise 2-hour window, logging the power disruption in the maintenance mainframe as a routine lightning strike anomaly caused by the storm. During that administrative blind spot, the 55-gallon industrial polymer storage drum containing Elena's body and the 500 pounds of commercial sodium hydroxide solution was rolled through the rear cargo elevator bay on Northwest 36th Street. Pendleton personally typed the falsified asset seizure manifest on a vintage mechanical terminal that was completely decoupled from the modern internet, classifying the container under a bogus federal maritime smuggling index that had been intentionally left unadjudicated since the mid-1980s. He knew that by utilizing a historical, dead-end case profile from the old drug wars, the item would automatically bypass the standard annual municipal audits, sitting undisturbed in the cold darkness of Vault Section 4 Delta, like a fossil preserved in amber. The green plastic inventory tag I signed that night didn't say murder, Agent, Pendleton whispered, his long, vein-streaked fingers twitching against the linen sheets as his breath became more shallow. It said, seized unrefined chemical precursors, case pending federal adjudication. For 24 years, every county auditor who walked through that vault with a clipboard looked at that drum, noted the federal injunction code, and checked the box for compliance. I turned the physical remains of that girl into a compliant piece of state property. The county paid the utility bills that kept the vault air-conditioned. The state police guarded the perimeter, and the judges signed the annual security certifications that ensured no civilian could ever open the lid. The recording shifted to the execution of the digital smoke screen across the Georgia state line. Pendleton detailed how he had deployed a dirty undercover narcotics asset named Hector Silva, a man who was entirely dependent on the captain to shield his own private extortion operations from a federal grand jury, to carry Elena's personal cell phone and credit cards out of the peninsula inside a rental vehicle. Pendleton personally calculated the exact timing of the cellular pings and the automated teller machine withdrawals, formatting the data path to mimic the behavioral patterns of an interstate human trafficking ring that was known to target young female motorists along the I-95 corridor. The media didn't require any sophisticated coercion to swallow the script, the old man muttered, his eyes narrowing with a cold, manic expression of pure, unadulterated intellectual vanity. They are driven by the metrics of sensationalism. A missing student swallowed by a local police cruiser is an ugly, structurally dangerous narrative that threatens the stability of the local government. But a beautiful young intern stolen by a phantom trucker from the interstate is a magnificent, highly profitable piece of television theater. I handed them the tracking maps. I stood before the cameras in my dress uniform and wept for her mother's agony, and the entire city cheered for my determination while my son sat in the back of the room, collecting his overtime pay and preparing his credentials for his upcoming sergeant's exam. The confession finalized its trajectory at 3:32 p.m., just as the distant, high-velocity roar of Julian Pendleton's SUV could be heard tearing through the flooded gravel driveway of the estate, its brakes screeching against the stone as he returned from his frantic medical supply run on Indiantown Road. The federal operators did not attempt to engage in a physical confrontation or hide their recording array. They stood smoothly from the bedside, their plain jackets covering their service weapons, their faces expressionless as the bedroom doors burst open and the silver-haired internal affairs sergeant rushed into the room, 2 heavy oxygen cylinders clutched against his ribs. Julian stopped dead in the center of the room, his breath coming in hot, desperate pants, his eyes darting from the active federal recording device on the sheet to the calm, unblinking faces of the public corruption agents. The physical reality of his absolute forensic defeat materialized in the air before he could even drop the cylinders. He looked at his father, whose mouth was still twisted into that slow, terrifyingly serene grimace of psychopathic pride, and he realized that the iron fortress of silence his family had maintained for nearly a quarter of a century had been permanently liquidated within a 20-minute window of natural weather. "It's over, Sergeant," Special Agent Marcus Vance said, stepping forward from the shadow of the veranda door, his hand reaching into his pocket to pull out the gold and blue enamel shield of the federal task force. "The captain has finalized the brief. The barcodes are logged, the tracking profiles are verified, and the digital files are already sitting on the secure servers in Washington. The blue wall has just collapsed into the mud of your own driveway. You are under arrest for first-degree murder and federal racketeering conspiracy." Julian did not run. He did not reach for the concealed off-duty weapon tucked into his waistband, and he did not speak a single word of defensive denial. The internal affairs training that had made him a master of tactical insulation inside the department now forced him to recognize the absolute, unyielding finality of a federal grand jury warrant packed with an active, uncoerced confession from his own father. He dropped the oxygen cylinders onto the plush carpet, his arms falling flexibly to his sides as the second federal operator moved smoothly behind his back, the heavy steel loops of the handcuffs clicking locked around his wrists with a sharp, echoing metallic thud that broke the long, historic silence of the River Oak estate. Behind them in the bed, Captain Arthur Pendleton took one final, long, deep breath of the pure oxygen surging through his mask, his brilliant blue eyes closing for the last time as his cardiac telemetry monitor began its final, frantic, irregular descent toward a flatline. He had saved his son from the electric chair in 2002 by transforming his county into an anonymous graveyard, but in the final, hypoxic seconds of his life, his absolute terror of an unshielded eternity had forced him to speak the names of his victims into the record, leaving his lineage to sit forever amidst the smoking, ruined remains of a public sanctuary that had been weaponized against the community from the very beginning. The operational takedown of a multi-decade administrative fortress requires a physical execution that is entirely decoupled from the standard, reactive mechanics of municipal law enforcement. While the echoes of Captain Arthur Pendleton's deathbed confession were still writing themselves into the encrypted servers of the Federal Task Force in Jupiter, 3 unmarked black tactical carrier vehicles cleared the security checkpoint of the Miami-Dade Central Property and Evidence Facility on Northwest 36th Street. It was precisely 4:12 p.m. on Thursday, April 16, 2026. The sky over the industrial perimeter of the Justice Complex was a dark, bruising shade of indigo, the tail end of the tropical squall still driving sheets of warm, salt-heavy rain against the windowless concrete walls of the structure. The 8 federal operators who stepped out of the carriers into the subterranean loading bay did not wear the standard high-visibility raid jackets or uniform caps of the local county sheriff. They were clad in sterile, full-body anti-contamination garments, their faces completely obscured by pressurized breathing respirators and their hands encased in triple layers of non-reactive nitrile gloves. They moved with a silent, industrialized velocity that bypassed the building's central administrative reception desks entirely. At their front stood Special Agent Marcus Vance, carrying a high-priority federal racketeering and evidence recovery warrant signed less than 3 hours prior by a United States Supreme Court justice, a legal hammer that stripped the local precinct guards and the regional logistics supervisors of any administrative authority to control the perimeter. The local evening shift supervisor, a veteran clerk whose 3 decades of service had been carefully insulated by the old Blue Wall Syndicate, stepped out of his glass enclosure with a heavy metal clipboard, his face tightening into an expression of defensive arrogance as he saw the federal teams approach the secure elevator banks. "This facility is under a permanent county court injunction," the supervisor stated, his hand resting instinctively against the biometric terminal that controlled the lower elevator gates. "No outside agency crosses this line without a dual signature clearance from the bureau chief's office." You are interrupting an active chain of custody tracking cycle. Marcus Vance did not engage in a verbal debate or pause to present the multi-page document for administrative review. He stepped into the supervisor's physical perimeter, his right hand holding a high-output electromagnetic override device flat against the master console panel, while his left hand presented the gold and blue enamel shield of the Federal Public Corruption Task Force. Your bureaucratic injunction was permanently liquidated 20 minutes ago in Jupiter, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical frequency that cut through the low thrum of the building's air filtration systems. Your bureau chief is currently sitting in a federal transport cage, and his father has just finalized the blueprint of this vault. Step away from the glass, sir, before we add an obstruction of federal racketeering charge to your retirement ledger. The electronic solenoid pins inside the master security gate melted with a sharp, localized hiss as the override device completed its short circuit, the heavy steel-reinforced doors sliding backward into their tracks to reveal the main cargo lift. The Federal Recovery Team moved inside the elevator compartment without a single millisecond of hesitation, their heavy utility boots clicking against the industrial diamond plate flooring as the lift descended into the deepest, climate-controlled foundations of the 3-story concrete bunker. This was the dark core of the county's property empire, a silent underworld where the physical residues of 40 years of urban narcotics wars and forgotten homicides were filed away under millions of digitized barcodes. The lift completed its descent at Vault Section 4 Delta, the restricted, double-insulated storage quadrant reserved for historical, unadjudicated international maritime assets that had been locked under federal injunction since the mid-1980s. The air inside the corridor was ice-cold, maintained at a continuous 42 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent the structural degradation of organic exhibits, smelling heavily of old cardboard packaging, oxidized lead ballistics rounds, and the dry, metallic tang of industrial freon lines. The space was dominated by long rows of 12-foot-high steel pallet racks that stretched into the dim, fluorescent shadows of the vault like the aisleways of a forgotten cathedral of corruption. Dr. Linda Torres walked down the center aisle of row 14, her handheld digital inventory locator pulsing a slow, amber light as it cross-referenced the historical database logs with the alphanumeric code Arthur Pendleton had whispered into the recorder 3 hours prior. The original county software mainframe had been programmed to display this sector as a static, empty dead zone, a ghost terminal that required no active physical audits or annual compliance inspections. But as Torres stopped her locator device directly in front of pallet position 14, Delta 02, beneath the low hum of a primary structural cooling vent, the scanner's screen lit up with a solid, unblinking crimson indicator. Resting on a reinforced steel pallet, tucked deep behind 3 dust-covered crates of historical maritime contraband from a 1984 Coast Guard interception, sat the 55-gallon industrial polymer storage drum. The container looked completely ordinary, a standard piece of commercial polyethylene hardware designed to transport hazardous manufacturing fluids without suffering structural leakage. Its heavy-duty locking ring was intact, sealed with an antique lead wire seal that had remained untouched since the 3rd week of July 2002. But the most chilling detail was the item that hung from the upper lifting handle, a faded, green plastic inventory tag bearing a forged case number and the crisp, neat signature of Captain Arthur Pendleton himself, listing the contents as seized unrefined chemical precursors, case pending federal adjudication. He didn't just hide her from the world, Dr. Torres whispered, her voice muffled slightly by the intake valves of her respirator mask as she illuminated the green plastic tag with a high-intensity, forensic light source. He turned her into an official monument to his own administrative immunity. He forced the state to guard his collection, using the county's public utility funds to maintain the precise thermal conditions required to prevent his chemical erase matrix from venting its gases into the upper offices. The tactical operators moved with immediate, synchronized safety protocols, deploying a heavy-duty portable hydraulic lifting frame to hoist the 200-pound polymer container off the steel rack and place it in the center of a triple-layered pristine white cleanroom drape they had laid across the concrete floor. The forensic biologists immediately established a localized negative pressure containment tent over the site, preventing any trace particulates, historical chemical vapors, or volatile atmospheric gases from escaping the immediate perimeter of the vault row during the primary breach. The physical removal of the drum's heavy-duty locking ring was executed using an automated, spark-free pneumatic cutting tool that severed the lead wire seal with a single, clean metallic click that echoed loudly through the frozen silence of Vault 4 Delta. Special Agent Marcus Vance threw his weight against the manual pressure release valve on the drum's lid, breaking a 24-year-old atmospheric seal with a sudden, sharp hiss that released a concentrated, Swedish chemical vapor into the filtration filters of their respirators. Under the harsh, unfiltered white glare of the team's portable LED surgical towers, the interior contents of the drum were exposed to the open air for the first time since the summer of 2002. There was no recognizable human shape, no intact clothing fabric, and no mass of soft tissue remaining inside the container, a testament to the terrifying, clinical efficacy of the hyperalkaline chemical matrix Arthur Pendleton had engineered. The drum was filled to a depth of 18 inches with a dense, highly viscous, amber-tinted mineralized calcium slurry, a translucent, gel-like sediment that looked to the naked eye like ordinary industrial manufacturing waste or old, degraded petroleum jelly. But as Dr. Torres lowered a high-definition digital macroimaging array into the amber fluid, lighting the depths of the polymer shell with shortwave ultraviolet illumination, the molecular topography of the sludge erupted into a brilliant, glowing map of biological survival. Resting at the very base of the drum, shielded from the full kinetic force of the alkaline hydrolysis by the dense settling of the calcium minerals, lay a series of 4 small, hard objects that had resisted 24 years of chemical erasure, a pair of surgical steel orthopedic pins that had been inserted into Elena Vance's left ankle following a high school athletic injury, and her small, white gold university-class ring, the internal engraving, FIU Criminal Justice, class of 2002 still, perfectly sharp beneath the yellow chemical crust. The chemistry did its work on the flesh, but the math is going to do its work on the Pendleton bloodline, Dr. Torres stated, her gloved hands utilizing sterile Teflon forceps to lift the class ring out of the calcium slurry and slide it into a vacuum-sealed transport vial. He believed that by turning her identity into a liquid solution, he had broken the physical chain of culpability forever. He didn't realize that the genetic signature of a human being is an undegradable piece of biological architecture. It doesn't matter how much sodium hydroxide you pour into a plastic barrel, the data remains waiting at the bottom. The forensic technicians spent 3 hours executing the microfiltration phase of the recovery, using automated perking pumps to draw the amber fluid through a series of multi-stage polyether sulfone membrane filters designed to concentrate any low-copy number nuclear DNA fragments that had survived the alkaline environment. Every drop of the calcium slurry was cataloged, vacuum-sealed into armored evidence canisters, and loaded into the secure transport bays of the federal carriers waiting in the loading dock below. The biological ghost of Elena Vance was officially leaving the Central Police Repository, her molecular signatures pulled from the dark vault of chemical erasure to sign the ultimate execution order of the Blue Wall Syndicate. As the federal fleet cleared the exterior gates of the Northwest 36th Street facility, their tires slicing through the standing water of the highway entrance ramps, the news of the vault breach was already spreading through the encrypted communication networks of the Regional Law Enforcement Command like an administrative wildfire. The Fortress of Silence had been permanently compromised from within, its green plastic inventory tags exposed as the cover stories for a multi-decade slaughterhouse, leaving an entire metropolitan department to watch the dark summer sky in a state of muted, hypervigilant terror as the federal engines roared back toward the downtown courthouse to initiate the final, historic presentation of data. The structural transition from the freezing, industrial corridors of Vault 4 Delta to the absolute clinical isolation of Interview Room 7 on the secure 4th floor of the Federal Justice Complex in downtown Miami required exactly 22 minutes of high-velocity armored transit. Within this windowless concrete vault, the multi-decade administrative illusion that had protected the Pendleton bloodline since the summer of 2002 ceased to possess any functional currency. There were no polished gold badges, no friendly county clerks to misplace an inventory ledger, and no long-term precinct alliances to dilute the raw kinetic force of a federal racketeering intervention. The space was a sterile, soundproofed cube defined by high-impact gray polymer walls, a single stainless steel table bolted directly into the subterranean concrete slab, and a massive, double-paned one-way mirror array that linked the interrogation field straight to the command terminal of the United States Attorney. Sergeant Julian Pendleton sat in the central restraint chair, his hands bound behind his back by heavy-duty steel loops that clicked with every calculated shift of his weight. The immaculate internal affairs uniform that had functioned as his supreme psychological camouflage inside the Miami-Dade Department was now stripped of its formal command insignias, his collar turned inward, and his silver hair falling across his forehead in damp, chaotic streaks that exposed the sharp, predatory contours of his jawline. For 2 hours following his arrival, he had maintained a rigid, unblinking tactical silence, his gaze locked onto the small mechanical ventilation grate near the ceiling, his breathing pattern a slow, rhythmic, highly rehearsed simulation of complete emotional detachment. He was an internal affairs supervisor. He had spent 20 years studying the behavioral failures of dirty officers caught in federal stings, and he knew that the first person to offer an administrative explanation in a public corruption room is the first person to sign his own execution order. Special Agent Marcus Vance stepped through the heavy electronic airlock door at precisely 7:15 p.m., carrying a single, heavy titanium briefcase packed with the digitized data streams and molecular readouts generated over the preceding 12 hours. He did not initiate the session with the aggressive, theatrical posturing of a standard street detective. He moved with a smooth, slow, clinical economy of motion, placing the briefcase flat on the stainless steel table and opening the locking hatches with 2 sharp, clean metallic clicks that echoed loudly against the gray polymer panels. He sat down directly opposite the 48-year-old sergeant, his face an unreadable mask of federal authority, his hands clad in a fresh pair of black nitrile gloves that left no trace elements on the documentation he was about to deploy. "Julian," Marcus began, his voice a low, steady, conversational drone that completely bypassed the formal law enforcement titles the suspect had used to terrorize his subordinates. The local television affiliates in Miami have just cleared their primetime commercial slots to broadcast the live footage of the tactical extraction team exiting the Northwest 36th Street property yard. The state's attorney has initiated a total administrative freeze on all retirement funds linked to the Blue Wall Syndicate, and your defense consortium has already filed 3 emergency motions to recuse themselves from your private escrow account. The infrastructure you spent 24 years hiding behind is currently being dismantled by a federal grand jury. The fortress is down. It's just you, the data, and the floorboards. Julian did not immediately redirect his gaze from the ceiling grate, his jaw muscles clenching with a visible, violent spasm that caused the thick veins along his throat to pulse dark against his collar line. When he finally turned his head to look at the federal agent, his clear, unnaturally bright blue eyes inherited straight from the dying commander in Jupiter, carried a cold, calculating, psychopathic intensity that searched for any crack in Marcus's professional composure. "You are executing an impressive piece of legal theater, Agent Vance," Julian whispered, his tone remarkably steady and flat, possessing that same low-frequency, authoritative rasp that had dominated his precinct commands. "You have marched into a local property facility with a federal warrant, and you have frightened a few shift clerks who are close to their retirement packages. But a theatrical extraction doesn't change the foundational parameters of the local court system. You possess a chain of circumstantial cell tower pings from 24 years ago and a collection of old inventory manifests that carry 0 direct, physical signatures linking my person to a capital offense. Without a body, without a weapon, and without a clean forensic origin point, your racketeering brief is nothing but an expensive piece of political speculation." Marcus Vance did not blink, nor did he offer a verbal refutation. He reached into the titanium briefcase, pulling out a sequence of high-definition, glossy macro photographs generated less than 3 hours prior beneath the LED surgical towers of Vault 4 Delta. He laid them across the stainless steel table like a series of geometric blueprints. The first image displayed the green plastic inventory tag from July 2002, the neat, ink-faded signature of Captain Arthur Pendleton visible beneath a layer of gray vault dust. The second image was a terrifying, close-up digital visualization of the white gold university-class ring, its interior engraving, FIU Criminal Justice, class of 2002, gleaming brilliant and sharp beneath the amber crust of the chemical slurry. "Let's look at the forensic origin point, Sergeant," Marcus said, his finger resting flat against the margin of the photograph. "This isn't political speculation. This is the interior base of polymer drum number 42S, recovered from pallet position 14, Delta 02 inside your father's private asset repository. We didn't just find an empty container, Julian. We found the white gold class ring and the surgical ankle pins that were logged into Elena Vance's childhood medical charts before you pulled her over on the shoulder of the Palmetto Expressway. Your father didn't dissolve her identity, Julian. He simply stored her biology inside a state-protected bunker and forced the county's armed guards to protect the evidence of your slaughterhouse for 24 years. Julian's eyes dropped to the image of the white gold ring for a fraction of a second, his pupils contracting into tiny black pins as his brain processed the sudden, catastrophic resurrection of a physical trophy he had believed was entirely eradicated from the physical universe by 500 pounds of commercial lye solution. A subtle, near-invisible somatic tremor moved through his shoulders, his chest expanding as he fought to maintain the stoic, detached mask of an internal affairs supervisor who was entirely above the panic of the ordinary criminal element. My father signed that inventory manifest in 2002 as part of an active maritime smuggling interception, Agent, Julian muttered, his voice dropping into a deeper, defensive register. He was the chief of the Homicide Bureau. He signed thousands of tags a year to secure unrefined chemical precursors that were pending federal destruction. The presence of a commercial storage drum inside a restricted county vault is an administrative compliance detail managed by the logistics staff, not a personal conspiracy. You cannot link the actions of an 80-year-old commander with a failing memory to a patrol officer who is executing standard sector sweeps miles away from that facility. We aren't relying on your father's memory anymore, Julian, Marcus Vance stated, his voice carrying the cold, flat finality of a judge delivering a terminal sentence. He reached back into the briefcase, pulling out a high-fidelity digital audio drive and connecting it to the room's central interface screen. We finalized the recording 3 hours ago at the River Oak Estate in Jupiter. Your father didn't die in silence, Julian. He spent his final 20 minutes of lucid consciousness delivering a complete, master-level operational briefing on the exact mechanics of the Blue Wall Syndicate. Marcus pressed the activation key, and the windowless concrete room was instantly filled with the dry, gravelly, monotone rasp of Captain Arthur Pendleton, a voice that came out of the ceiling speakers like a transmission from a historical tomb, cutting through Julian's defensive posture with the merciless clarity of a razor slicing through drywall. Julian arrived at the Coral Gables estate at 2 a.m. His uniform shirt was torn, his gloves covered in the blood of the intern. She had fought him inside maintenance shed number 3 behind the Fleet Yards. I personally directed the deactivation of the backup tapes at the 36th Street Vault. I signed the green plastic tag myself to turn her remains into state property. We used Hector Silva to carry her cards into Georgia to feed the television stations the trafficking script. I built the wall around him because he was my blood. The sound of his father's voice, detailing the exact physical architecture of the slaughter, logging the precise times of the phone pings, and naming every senior supervisor who had participated in the extraction, struck Julian Pendleton with the kinetic force of an invisible physical blow. The absolute compartmentalization that had allowed him to climb the ranks of the Internal Affairs Division while his victim was dissolving in a plastic barrel next door collapsed completely, his facial muscles turning into a loose, trembling mask of raw, psychopathic rage. He lunged forward across the stainless steel table, his heavy frame straining against the high-tensile steel constraints behind his back, his teeth bared in a guttural, animalistic snarl that tore through the long silence of the federal vault. The old bastard broke. Julian roared, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, screeching register that sounded completely divorced from the calculated authority he had used to command his precincts. He sat in that waterfront palace for 11 years, spending my mother's inheritance on private nurses and breathing my air, while I was the one who had to stay in the city, managing the dirty files, paying off the technicians, and watching the grand jury lists to ensure his name remained on the marble pediment of the academy. He didn't build the wall, I maintained it. I was the one who kept the concrete dry. "We know, Julian," Marcus Vance said, his voice remaining remarkably calm, steady, and flat as he stood up from the table, his fingers closing the hatches of the titanium briefcase with two sharp, definitive snaps. "We have the full alignment now. The digital CSLI logs from 2002 prove your cruiser was inside shed number 3 while Elena's phone was pinging your radio. Your father's recorded deathbed briefing details the exact logistics of the lie solution, and Dr. Torres has just confirmed that the molecular residue at the bottom of drum 42S matches Elena's maternal DNA profile with a certainty of 1 in 84 quadrillion. You outran the local detectives, you outlived the victim's parents, and you used the gold shield of public justice to guard your museum, but you forgot that the system you engineered was built on paper, and paper eventually burns when the light gets bright enough." Marcus stepped back toward the electronic airlock door, leaving the 48-year-old internal affairs sergeant twisting violently within the steel restraints, his face a deep, dangerous purple as he screamed curses at the one-way mirror, his silver hair plastered across his eyes, his pristine uniform trousers stained with the sweat of his own psychological collapse. Behind the glass, the federal prosecutors and behavioral analysts stood in absolute, breathless silence, their recording terminals locking the final, explosive self-indictment into the state's central archive. The blue wall of silence had not merely fractured, it had been ground into a fine, sterile dust by the convergence of modern molecular archaeology and digital tracking data, leaving the premier dynasty of the old department stripped of its historical immunity, exposed to the open world as nothing more than a cartel of butchers who had turned their country into a secret graveyard for their own survival. The reconstruction of a 24-year-old capital atrocity buried inside the industrial infrastructure of a metropolitan municipality requires a mechanical process of forensic demolition that is entirely distinct from standard crime scene processing. When an offender is an active, uniformed patrol officer operating under the direct, real-time administrative guidance of a homicide bureau chief, his primary assault arenas are not chosen from the volatile, open spaces of the civilian world. They are selected from the restricted, state-monitored dead zones of the county's own operational grid. On the morning of Friday, April 17, 2026, less than 12 hours after Sergeant Julian Pendleton's physical collapse inside the federal interrogation cells, a specialized multi-agency forensic excavation task force initiated a complete physical takeover of the Miami-Dade County Fleet Maintenance yards on Northwest 58th Street. The target of the federal intervention was Maintenance Shed Number 3, a massive, corrugated iron and cinderblock structure built during the industrial expansion of the early 1980s to service heavy-duty municipal vehicles, decommissioned transit buses, and regional tactical transport units. The operation was executed under an emergency federal public safety exclusion order that bypassed the local municipal zoning boards and the county's internal facilities management networks. State troopers and armed federal marshals established a 3-block tactical perimeter around the industrial yard, shutting down the commercial transit lanes and wrapping the entire exterior perimeter of the warehouse in heavy, opaque black vinyl weather screens. The civilian mechanics and fleet technicians who arrived for the early morning shift were turned away at the gates by federal agents, forced to stand in groups along the rain-slicked concrete of the outer avenue while portable diesel generators, high-resolution concrete coring grids, digital atmospheric mass spectrometers, and ground-penetrating radar arrays were rolled into the facility's interior. Special Agent Marcus Vance entered the damp, high-ceilinged core of Shed Number 3 at precisely 8:30 a.m., accompanied by Dr. Linda Torres and a team of 6 forensic engineers from the Federal Structural Recovery Unit. The interior air of the warehouse was dense with the historic, calcified aromas of industrial existence, stale diesel exhaust, heavy hydraulic fluid, oxidized lubricants, and the chemical, bitter scent of commercial floor degreasers that had been applied to the concrete deck by maintenance crews over a quarter of a century of daily operations. The space was dominated by a deep, central service pit, a 20-foot-long concrete trench embedded in the floorboards to allow mechanics to work beneath the chassis of heavy county vehicles. The geospatial tracking data and the layout sheets deciphered from the captain's private notebooks don't point to an external disposal path, Dr. Torres said, her voice echoing hollowly against the corrugated iron walls as she adjusted the wavelength settings on her handheld forensic macroscope. Julian Pendleton didn't use an alleyway or a canal. He brought her here because this shed was completely insulated from public civilian surveillance. It operated under a rotating shift of loyal mechanics who answered directly to his father's administrative network, and it possessed the exact chemical processing tools required to erase an active letting of blood before the morning inspections could begin. A psychopath with his level of institutional entitlement doesn't run from the state. He uses the state's own maintenance tools to scrub his hands clean. The structural engineers initiated their physical audit of the facility by mapping the concrete floorboards adjacent to the central mechanics trench using a high-density, three-dimensional ground-penetrating radar unit that sent electromagnetic pulses down into the structural foundations of the building. For 3 hours, the computing terminal generated a continuous, high-definition digital blueprint of the subsurface geology, mapping the parallel patterns of the steel rebar grids and the historic drainage lines that ran beneath the concrete deck toward the municipal industrial waste processing tanks. The early layers displayed a standard, uniform industrial density, thick blocks of reinforced poured concrete, gravel drainage beds, and vintage cast iron plumbing channels. But as the radar sensor crossed a specific 4-foot square perimeter at the furthest, unlit western corner of the mechanics pit, the digital interface registered a sharp, geometrically anomalous variation, a series of distinct structural fractures and localized concrete patches that indicated a violent, deep-set excavation and subsequent manual repair of the floor matrix after the building's initial construction. The entry to this subterranean repository was hidden beneath a massive, 300-pound industrial steel storage locker filled with obsolete diesel engine parts and rusted pneumatic tools. The excavation team utilized a heavy hydraulic crane to hoist the steel structure off the site, exposing a rough, unevenly poured rectangle of aged concrete that differed significantly from the smooth, machine-finished grade of the surrounding floor. The original patch had been coated with multiple layers of dark gray epoxy floor paint and rubbed with industrial grease to make it indistinguishable from the rest of the dirty workspace, a defensive cosmetic disguise that had successfully blinded 24 years of low-level municipal facility inspectors who walked through the yard with their checklists. "He broke the floor deck," Marcus Vance whispered, his face turning an ashen, pale gray beneath his tactical cap as he knelt over the patch, his fingers tracing the rough, hand-finished borders of the concrete seam. He didn't just wash the walls after the assault inside the shed. He realized that the volume of blood generated by a high-velocity impact with a tire iron would soak deep into the porous structural joints of the subfloor concrete, leaving a permanent biological signature that a routine chemical scrub could never erase. He dug up the floor of the county's own building, poured a fresh layer of mortar over the primary stain, and went back to work the next morning using this exact spot to park his sector cruiser. The forensic engineers deployed a high-speed, diamond-tipped concrete coring array, drilling a series of 6-inch vertical cylinders out of the hand-poured patch to reach the historical construction layers buried beneath the surface deck. The operation was executed with extreme technical caution. The extraction team utilized a continuous stream of pure chilled water to lubricate the drill bits, preventing the generation of high frictional heat that could incinerate or alter any delicate, ancient biological proteins or microfragmented human DNA molecules trapped within the concrete matrix. As the vertical cylinders were pulled from the floor using hydraulic extraction forceps, the lower sections of the concrete cores, representing the original 2002 floor base that had been shattered and buried beneath the patch, displayed a distinct, dark, rusty brown discoloration that cut through the gray aggregate stone like a fossilized vein of iron. Dr. Torres applied a high-sensitivity chemical reagent, a specialized luminol compound combined with a high-density fluorometric solution, to the lower face of the concrete core. The moment the fluid collided with the porous stone, The interior structure of the cylinder erupted into a brilliant, unblinking luminescent blue glow that was captured with absolute clarity by the team's digital forensic documentation cameras. A massive, high-velocity arterial spray pattern that had remained preserved inside the concrete air pockets for 24 years, insulated from the outside atmosphere like a biological artifact inside a tomb. The chemistry doesn't expire when it's sealed inside stone, Dr. Torres stated, her gloved hand carefully labeling the luminescent cylinder and sliding it into a heavy-duty, lead-lined transport container. Julian Pendleton believed that by burying the fractured floorboards beneath a layer of fresh industrial cement and covering the surface with grease, he had broken the physical timeline of the assault forever. He didn't realize that the concrete would function as a perfect preservation matrix, shielding Elena Vance's blood from the tropical air and preventing the organic decay elements from degrading the nuclear DNA structure before we could bring the sequencers to the site. But the exhumation of maintenance shed number 3 did not terminate at the recovery of the concrete cores. As the Federal Task Force expanded their structural search, utilizing thermal imaging sensors and pneumatic chisels to dismantle the interior drywall panels of the tool storage office that sat adjacent to the mechanics pit, they discovered a secondary, hidden architectural void built into the space behind an old industrial air compressor line. Hidden within a reinforced steel utility safe bolted directly into the load-bearing masonry of the building's central support pillar lay the ultimate physical trophy archive of the Blue Wall Syndicate, a collection of 14 small, clear glass specimen vials, each holding a single, meticulously cataloged personal artifact harvested from different high-profile cold cases that had occurred across the county between 1998 and 2012. The first drawer of the hidden safe held the small, tarnished silver watercolor charm that had been clipped from Elena Vance's keychain on the night of her disappearance on the Palmetto shoulder. But behind that initial piece of evidence lay a systematic, chronological ledger of institutional horror that expanded the scope of the Pendleton conspiracy far beyond the boundaries of the 2002 file. The safe contained items representing 12 other young women who had vanished from highway transit hubs, municipal parks, and university corridors across South Florida during the height of Captain Arthur Pendleton's administrative reign. A vintage gold engagement ring from a student who disappeared from a rest stop near Homestead in 1999. A plastic employee ID badge from a woman who vanished from a transit station in Hialeah in 2005. A small enamel hair slide from an art student who disappeared from a gallery night in Coconut Grove in 2009. The younger Pendleton had not been a disorganized, reactive offender who struck out of sudden emotional panic during a roadside stop. He was an organized, state-sanctioned predator who had spent his entire adulthood utilizing his marked cruiser, his official uniform, and his father's absolute control over the Homicide Bureau to select, intercept, and systematically process his targets within the silent, unmonitored core of the county's own public facilities. Every time he drove through a sector, signing the logbooks, responding to domestic emergencies, and receiving civic commendations from the local city commission, he was returning to this hidden industrial hangar to manage his collection, using the very tools the taxpayers provided for the maintenance of public transit to shield the blood on his boots. The recovery of this hidden underground repository completely transformed the nature of the upcoming federal prosecution, turning the trial of Julian Pendleton into a historic, multi-jurisdictional public corruption and serial murder indictment that would dominate federal jurisprudence for the next half-century. The federal prosecutors realized that the public defender teams, which were still attempting to draft complex constitutional motions to suppress the surreptitious coffee mug DNA evidence based on technical chain of custody arguments, would have zero legal footing before a federal jury. The direct physical recovery of the victim's jewelry and the extraction of the matching arterial blood patterns from the concrete foundations of a building managed under his father's active administrative command sector constituted an absolute, unassailable chain of physical culpability that led straight from the dark history of the 2002 summer storm into the absolute core of the state's highest criminal courts. As the technical recovery teams completed the processing phase of the site, vacuum packing every individual concrete core and glass vial into armored transport containers and loading them onto the secure federal utility trucks parked in the yard below, Marcus Vance walked out into the open air of the maintenance yard. The dark tropical storm clouds were finally beginning to break over the Miami skyline, the hot morning sun throwing a sharp, brilliant white light across the concrete structures of Northwest 58th Street. The industrial district was silent, its administrative deception permanently unblinded, its workers left to look at the buildings of their own municipality with a new, corrosive paranoia that would contaminate their civic faith for generations to come. The premier dynasty of the old department had been stripped of its camouflage, its hangar of silence dismantled piece by individual piece, leaving an entire city to sit forever amidst the smoking, unblinded ruins of a public sanctuary that had been turned into a slaughterhouse by the keepers of the peace. The physical extraction of Elena Vance's white gold university ring and the core drilling of her preserved arterial blood spray from the concrete foundations of maintenance shed number 3 did not merely conclude a local public corruption tracking loop. It initiated a total, cataclysmic institutional collapse across the entire municipal governance framework of South Florida. By the afternoon of Saturday, April 18, 2026, the psychological shockwave had traveled far beyond the yellow federal barrier tapes of the industrial yard, cutting like a high-voltage current through the county courtrooms, the civil service boards, and the multi-billion-dollar luxury real estate developments that define the skyline of modern Miami. The Metropolitan Center was entering a state of absolute, structural paralysis. It was one thing for a community to discover that a violent serial offender had been operating within the chaotic shadows of its interstate highway corridors, but it was an entirely different tier of existential trauma to realize that the ultimate protectors of their civil sanity, the silver-haired commanders who had anchored the Homicide Bureau for 30 years, had systematically used the security codes, the evidence drapes, and the public asset storage vaults of the state to run an untouchable slaughterhouse. Inside the secure administrative bunker of the federal courthouse on North Miami Avenue, the environment was completely stripped of standard municipal public relations optimism. The United States Attorney sat at the center of a massive limestone conference table, his eyes fixed on a confidential structural corruption brief delivered by the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force and the forensic intelligence analysts of a latent technology center. Flanking him were the Regional Director of Federal Racketeering Prosecutions, the Chief Oversight Commissioner of the state's law enforcement training standards, and the specialized forensic anthropologists who had supervised the breach of Vault 4 Delta. The emergency tactical session had been summoned not to organize the trial strategy for Julian Pendleton, whose legal damnation was already considered a scientific and mathematical certainty, but to construct an immediate containment protocol for the thousands of historic felony convictions that had been processed under the Pendleton family lineage since 1985. The public media is focusing on the emotional resolution of the 2002 Vance cold case, but our administrative reality is an absolute constitutional emergency, the regional prosecuting director stated, his pen tracing a thick red line across a localized organizational chart of the Area 4 Homicide Bureau. Arthur Pendleton didn't just run a rogue concealment cell to protect his youngest son. He built a highly efficient, multi-layered administrative syndicate that controlled the entire flow of forensic data across this county for 3 decades. He signed the evidence tags, he managed the narcotics destruction manifests, and he personally selected the precinct supervisors who verified the tracking logs for every high-profile homicide trial in this district. Now that we have scientifically proven that his private inventory logs were completely fabricated to hide a serial slaughterhouse, every single capital conviction, every life sentence, and every asset forfeiture processed under his signature between 1985 and 2015 is legally toxic and vulnerable to an immediate constitutional challenge. The immediate legal and economic fallout began to vibrate through the regional justice system with an explosive velocity. Within 48 hours of the federal raid on the Northwest 36th Street facility, the State Public Defender's Office filed a massive, unified class action omnibus motion before the Florida Supreme Court, demanding the immediate suspension and comprehensive judicial review of over 1,400 active felony convictions that had relied on evidence processed within Vault Section 4 Delta during the Pendleton administration. The municipal bond markets responded with immediate panic. The county's legal liability reserves were projected to face a multi-billion-dollar deficit from upcoming civil rights lawsuits filed by wrongfully convicted individuals, triggering a sharp downgrade in the regional infrastructure credit ratings and causing international real estate consortiums to pause their investment projects along the coastal zones. While the municipal administration scrambled to insulate its financial networks from the toxic social radiation of the arrest, Dr. Linda Torres remained locked inside the cleanroom facility at the Layton Technology Center, completing the digital reconstruction of the 24 digital microcassettes and encrypted flash drives recovered from the titanium safe behind the Fleet Yard's masonry pillars. The data drives were connected to a series of high-capacity diagnostic mainframes, their binary codes displayed across long rows of high-resolution monitors that mapped the hidden financial tracking networks of the Blue Wall Syndicate. These files did not represent standard police field logs. They were the pristine, unredacted accounting ledgers of a sophisticated internal protection racket, a multi-decade criminal enterprise that had utilized the department's internal affairs database to identify, blackmail, and systematically tax corrupt narcotics officers who were operating along the maritime smuggling corridors of the peninsula. As Torres decoded the alphanumeric shorthand Pendleton had used to log his financial transactions, she discovered that the killer had treated his high-ranking internal affairs authority as a specialized tool to secure absolute operational insulation for his private museum. In a digital entry dated September 14, 2009, 7 years after Elena Vance's molecular remains were sealed into the industrial polymer drum, Julian Pendleton had written, "The Federal Oversight Committee finalized their technological audit of our central evidence mainframe this afternoon, without a single variance note. A magnificent display of systemic compliance. By ensuring that our internal asset inventory numbers conform perfectly to the automated tracking algorithms used by the federal courts, we have effectively forced the district judges to act as the primary guarantors of our privacy. The inspectors look at the digital labels, they verify the automated timestamps, and they check the box for security. They do not possess the spatial imagination to look past the barcode on the plastic lid to see the liquid aggregate inside. The precision of the modern tracking matrix is the ultimate camouflage for a permanent collection. As long as the data string is compliant, the physical artifact remains invisible." The notebooks revealed that every high-profile arrest Julian Pendleton had executed during his rise through the Internal Affairs Division, every dirty cop he had exposed, every administrative leak he had plugged, every public corruption headline he had handed to the local newspapers, had been a calculated maneuver to maintain the absolute moral purity of his public profile. He had turned the entire internal discipline apparatus of the department into a private counter-surveillance filter, ensuring that if an independent precinct investigator ever attempted to examine a historical tracking anomaly or question a missing asset manifest inside Vault 4 Delta, Julian could immediately initiate a high-priority internal misconduct investigation against that detective, destroying his professional credibility and forcing him out of the service before his questions could reach a grand jury. The psychological devastation experienced by the surviving family members of the wider regional victim ledger during this week of absolute exposure was an acute, agonizing phenomenon that transformed the social climate of South Florida. In a quiet, sun-bleached residential street in West Palm Beach, 81-year-old Thomas Sterling, the father of Cynthia and Sterling, who had vanished from a transit hub near Homestead in 1999, sat on his porch staring at the high-definition photographs of the Silver College charms and personal artifacts that had been pulled from the titanium safe behind the Fleet Yard's airlines. For 27 long years, Thomas had been forced to live under a crushing weight of administrative silence, his daughter's file classified by the local precinct captains as a simple migratory runaway case, an assumption that had left the family line to wither in a permanent state of mutual isolation and unverified grief. "They looked me in the eye every summer for 20 years and told me the highway had swallowed her,"